I am Bill Lake, the Chief of the Media Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission, and I want to welcome you to this workshop on our review of our cross-ownership rules. Most of you probably know that the Commission has for a very long time had rules that limit consolidation in the electronic media, in broadcast media. They serve at least three very important policies of the Commission. One is to promote competition in the media. Another is to promote diversity. We want to promote independent, diverse voices. And the third is to promote localism, service to the local community. These rules limit the number of TV stations that can be commonly owned in a market. They limit the number of radio stations that can be commonly owned in a market. And they limit cross-ownership between broadcast stations and newspapers. And it's this last rule that we're here to focus on today. Since 1975, the Commission has had a rule that generally prohibits ownership of a daily newspaper and a broadcast station in the same market. There are a number of exceptions, and one of those exceptions exists in this market with WFLA and the Tribune. And that's one of the reasons that we're here in Tampa to discuss the subject generally and to hear what people have to say about the effects of that cross-ownership in this market. This proceeding will be included in the record of our ownership review, and it's being streamed live, and it's being live webcast at this moment. And I will just now review the ground rules for our speakers. We have a number of very impressive panelists with us today. We'll ask each to speak for 10 minutes, and we'll try to enforce that limit strictly so that we can save time for questions and for questions from those in the audience. I'll ask those in the audience as a matter of courtesy to hold their questions or disagreements until the time in the proceeding for them. But at any time, if someone has a question for one of the panelists or for all the panelists, you can tweet that question to hashtag MOWKSHP, and those questions will be collected and then brought up to us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Waldman, who will moderate the panel.
Thank you very much, Bill. First, before we get started with the guests, we should introduce the folks from the FCC who are up here. Bill Lake is the Chief of the Media Bureau. Bob Ratcliffe is the Deputy Bureau Chief of the Media Bureau, and Jennifer Tatel is the Head of Industry Analysis at the Media Bureau.
Excuse me, Steve. Before we go any further, I do want to thank the University of South Florida for hosting us and giving us this absolutely beautiful facility to work in.
So our first speaker is going to be Robert Dardenne, who's an associate professor and the chair of the Journalism and Media Studies program at the University of South Florida in St. Petersburg. He's reported for independent and chain-owned newspapers in Louisiana, New York, and Mexico City, teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses, and has co-authored The Conversation of Journalism and A Free and Responsible Student Press. Thank you.
Thank you. News and news people from many perspectives have been a major part of my life in several countries and in several newspapers and news organizations in the United States. I believe in news. I believe in its ability to nurture our freedom and our democracy, and I believe in our press's ability to provide news that we as citizens require, although I don't always believe it does. I'll take and appreciate good journalism no matter who produces it, and I think organizations or individuals that produce good news should be rewarded, and organizations or individuals that produce bad news should not. I can't and don't condemn all news media and all journalists. I know too many good people striving to do good work. Neither can I condemn news or other media outlets for making a profit. The first responsibility of any commercial media entity under our system is to make enough money to survive. That money should come from fair, and healthy competition in the marketplace, from producing news that people need to make wise decisions and to survive and prosper, and from innovation and creative use of new technologies to better serve citizens. News media organizations struggle simultaneously with massive changes brought on by the onset of digital technologies and with a recession or near recession. They face, and some argue helped usher in, a political movement characterized by extreme and seemingly intractable partisanship in which news media are superficially but effectively labeled as left or right. I think many in the tradition-bound media news reacted badly to these circumstances for which they prepared inadequately. Newspapers, for example, created a circumstance in which they give away in one medium virtually the same content they charge for in another. Reformers and critics note changes in content that emphasize the superficial and indulge our seemingly endless thirst for amusement, and an approach to news that too frequently accommodates powerful government, corporate, and other authorities. Increased consolidation of ownership, including cross-ownership in single markets, is a predictable response. Many media companies consider it a necessary fix, but it is a quick fix. They should not be encouraged to apply such a remedy if consolidation creates more efficient and cost-efficient ways to deliver an increasingly insubstantial news and information product. And I say product because I'm not sure how far I'm willing to stretch the definition of news. Media news organizations should not be rewarded for poor anticipation and response. They should be rewarded for making good use of technology to equip people to be better citizens. They should be rewarded for figuring out how to present news and arguments that engage people and compel them to think and act. News media profits should not come from consolidating media under fewer and fewer owners, from narrowing perspectives to the point where what we know and what entertains us comes mostly from GE, Disney, News Corp, Time Warner, Viacom, and CBS, or locally from fewer and fewer owners of our news and other media. Consolidation of news outlets, including cross-ownership in single markets, maximizes opportunities for reporters to work across media platforms, often resulting in more similar news, in fewer reporters doing more stories for more media, and in the same story being reported across more media, often from the same or similar perspectives. Consolidation in cross-ownership has not saved news organizations money so that they can reinvest it to create better quality and more news. It has just saved organizations money. Jobs in journalism are still being lost at a rate higher than most jobs in the country. Newspapers and television stations still often emphasize less expensive crime and accident news. Foreign news and investigative reporting are still being diminished. Veteran reporters and editors are still being replaced by less experienced and cheaper ones. None of these are good signs, although there are good signs among the bad. Some news organizations given little chance of survival are, in fact, surviving. Even if much of corporate journalism wasn't an early, effective adopter of innovation, hundreds, if not thousands of others were, with bloggers and other individuals, nonprofits, new media groups and organizations, unorthodox partnerships, and others starting mostly online news and information initiatives throughout the country. While all this has the potential to provide many more voices to the public arena, it doesn't now. And this potential will be mostly unrealized if the FCC and the people allow Comcast and other corporations to control Internet content, a circumstance that recently became closer to reality than ever before. Even if net neutrality prevails, most people still get most of their news from traditional media, newspapers and television, bloggers, most radio, some TV and magazines, and many online news and other sites depend on reporting of major newspapers and news organizations to provide news and information nourishment for this omnivorous and increasingly hungry 24-hour information creature that we've created. So in fact, voices and perspectives in traditional media do matter. Who owns them matters. Philosophically, there is no room for debate on this issue. Democracy demands and requires a free press with multiple voices. I can't imagine why the FCC isn't working on incentives that would result in more people owning more media, not fewer people owning more media. The Commission and other powerful entities and all of us should encourage public access television, such as Tampa's own TBCN, where people with ideas and motivation can express themselves on their own television shows. In Florida, however, short-sighted state and local governments, both seemingly afraid of competing ideas, have done all they can do to destroy public access. The city of Tampa, although now decreasing its support, is an exception. The FCC and other powerful entities should encourage community radio, such as Tampa Bay's own WMNF, fully supported by its listeners who have some access and influence over its content. These and other media outlets, including WSLR Radio in Sarasota, provide alternative content to the commercial media and pay attention to and serve readers, listeners, and viewers in ways the large commercial media do not. I am not convinced, however, that the government can legislate good news. I am not convinced that tradition-bound corporations, many of which reached unimaginatively reacted unimaginatively to the digital revolution and a crippling recession, and in some cases changed the nature of news by pandering to ideological interests, deserve to continue that record through ownership of even more media. Cross-ownership may save money, but it won't save journalism. Journalism has to save itself, not through consolidating, but by discovering how to engage, excite, educate, and interact with people. And people have to save journalism by recognizing, acknowledging, and rewarding its best efforts, and by refusing to accept or support anything else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will be hearing from Karen Dunlap, who is the president of the Poynter Institute.
Members of the Commission, welcome back to Tampa Bay. In 2007, you invited the people of this region to give you their views on media ownership, and over 100 responded. I'm pleased to have been among the panelists then, and I thank you for the opportunity to participate today. In greeting you, I also welcome you on behalf of the Poynter Institute. Our mission and structure are important to this discussion on media ownership, so let me tell you just a little about Poynter. The Institute was created 35 years ago by Nelson Poynter as an unusual school for working journalists. Poynter's mission is to teach those who practice the craft of journalism and those who lead news organizations. Poynter also promotes the central role of journalism in a democracy. One reason it's unusual is because the school owns a newspaper, the St. Petersburg Times, or as I like to call it, the Pulitzer Prize-winning St. Petersburg Times. The school's mission is to inspire journalistic excellence. The newspaper's mission is to produce excellent journalism and maintain a sound business. After years of study, Mr. Poynter settled on this structure because he wanted to be sure that the paper he owned remained independent and locally owned long after his death. In the late 1960s and early 70s, he was concerned about the power of chain ownership and other corporate entities, much as the FCC discussion on ownership originated out of concern about powerful business voices. Now, please note the rest of the story, and my colleagues on the panel will tell you more about it. Poynter owns a news organization that competes in Tampa Bay against one of the early converged news operations, Media General's Tampa Tribune, WFLA, and TBO.com. FCC actions on cross-ownership could be of special interest in this region, but that's only a possibility. As you know, the media environment has changed dramatically, and Bob touched on this. It's changed since you were here 3 years ago. I'll mention some findings that came out in reports within the last few weeks and give some comments from 3 meetings of media leaders last week. Newspaper publishers met in Orlando, editors met in Washington, radio and television news directors, as well as managers and owners, convened in Las Vegas. In fact, the chairman of the FCC was one of the main speakers. Speaking at the American Society of Newspaper Editors Summit, David Carr, who's media columnist for the New York Times, said he carries more publishing power in his backpack than publishers had in 1999. Michael Smith, executive director of Northwestern University's Media Management Center, made the same point more starkly to the group of the Newspaper Association of America. He said an 8-year-old, and let's say an affluent 8-year-old, has more publishing power in her bedroom today than publishers had in 1999. Both statements speak to control of societal megaphones today. The FCC's concern about media ownership is largely about who has the megaphones or the means to speak to whole communities. For centuries, the owners of mass media were a powerful, exclusive club. They are still powerful, but they now share megaphones with the masses. Almost anyone can post almost anything to friends, to a community, or really to the world. Drawing an audience, of course, is another matter, as is the matter of producing news and information that is of value to society. The megaphone simply speaks to the means of commanding attention, of gaining influence. The tools are available and being extensively used. As you know, dramatic changes are not limited to the means of sending messages. We also see big changes in the willingness to receive them. Traditional mass media news audiences continue to decline. Between 2008 and 2009, television network news, local television news, magazines, and newspapers saw reduced audiences. That's according to the 2010 State of the News Media report by the Project for Excellence in Journalism. Print newspaper circulation losses accelerated to over 10%. Local television news dipped by about 6%. Audio audiences were fairly stable, and only cable television and the internet gained audience. Advertising revenue also declines. Cable advertising had the strongest showing by remaining flat. All other media experienced revenue declines, including a 24% drop in local television and 26% fall in the combined ad revenue of newspapers, print, and online businesses. All this occurred in the context, of course, of national and worldwide recession. Business was down almost everywhere, and that simply compounded the problems of the news business. Still, we saw a particular shrinkage in the nation's news capacity. Huge staff reductions took place in network news operations, in local news, magazines, and newspapers. The decline was greater for journalists of color. Last week, the Association of Editors reported an overall loss of 11% of the workforce in member newsrooms, but a 12.6% decrease in non-white staffers. The RTNDA Hofstra study of 2008 and 9 showed an increase in white employees in radio and television, but losses of black and Hispanic staff members. Asian and Native American numbers increased very slightly or were flat. The number of women in broadcast increased. Poynter's media analyst Rick Edmonds calculated that the newspaper industry has lost $1.6 billion in reporting and editing capacity since 2000, or about 30% over that period. This comes from the sector that produces the vast majority of original reporting in local, national, and international news. Even the many news startups replace only a small fraction of editorial capacity, and they too must find long-term sustainability. The PEJ report concludes, unless some system of financing the production of content is developed, it's difficult to see how repertorial journalism will not continue to shrink, regardless of the potential tools offered by technology. All this is to say, the matter of cross-ownership of media bears watching, but it is not the critical issue in national communications. Yes, huge corporations from traditional media, or mighty large new technology companies, or investors from other fields have the potential to grasp key outlets in many markets, but the incentive has been reduced, and opportunities for other channels have been increased. I urge the FCC to continue to examine how relaxed cross-ownership might be accomplished without significant erosion to independent, locally produced coverage of community issues. Moreover, I urge the FCC to continue a reexamination of this Commission's role in the face of news media transformation, since you are the primary organization charged with monitoring the nation's communications. The problems that I have outlined are a threat to an informed democracy. We are seeing the deterioration of informed civic discourses as we drown in information, opinions, debates, half-truths, and lies. I ask 3 steps of this Communications Commission. The first is to uphold journalism as the business of news transforms. To this end, I commend your look at the future of media and join the call for, quote, correcting the nation's civic deficits, unquote. I urge you to engage new means of assisting communities with a steady flow of daily, local, national, and international news. A model similar to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting might be needed as an interim measure during transformation. Such a model would fund specific reporting areas through funds from foundations, citizen contributions, and, yes, the government. Second, I ask you to regain your leadership role in promoting media diversity. The death last week of Dr. Benjamin L. Hooks, former FCC commissioner, was a reminder of a time when this organization prodded media to increase diversity in ownership and leadership, in staffing and coverage. Look at major conferences today on the future of news or at the staffs of news startups, and it often appears that we are moving to a future that is less diverse than the present media. The Knight Commission on the Information Needs of Communities noted that large segments of society don't have access to broadband, and they are mostly rural and urban poor communities. These are issues of economic diversity and often racial and ethnic diversity. I ask you to act so that all communities have access to news media and are included in the production and in the content of news. And third, I urge the Commission to return to champion civil exchanges in the interest of greater civic discourse. Examples include standing against hate speech and helping to raise the general level of exchanges. This matter and the others that I mentioned call for creative solutions to bring results while respecting independent speech. Let me conclude by returning to the news media conferences of last week. A long-standing tradition in editors' meeting is to recognize great journalism. This year's award-winning panelists and other award winners include the following: 2 Philadelphia Daily News reporters who spent the year tracking down immigrant store owners whose businesses were destroyed by a small group of police officers. Officers destroyed surveillance cameras, stole food, trashed stores, and underreported cash that was confiscated. A Denver Post photojournalist who followed up when an editor asked, who would sign up for the military these days? The photojournalist and a reporter told about war through the story of an 18-year-old who went from high school to the Army in Iraq. A KARE TV team in Minneapolis reported on the economy by showing a fast food store staffed by former corporate employees. An engineer, an IT specialist, and a chef were among others who lost their jobs and moved to flipping burgers. A St. Petersburg Times reporter focused on stories of everyday people: a single mother who registered for food stamps, a man who feared flying even though his job required it. He had been a passenger on the plane that landed in the Hudson. Last week was about celebrating excellent journalism. This week is about preserving it. I thank the commissioners of the FCC for this hearing.
Thank you very much. I'm going a little bit out of order here. I'd like to next hear from Patrick Montega, the editor and publisher of La Gazzetta.
I last spoke publicly about cross-ownership and its negative effect on my newspaper in the minority media market 3 years ago when the FCC was in Tampa to hear local comments. Since that time, nothing has really changed for my industry. FCC's policies continue to have a detrimental effect on media diversity. Cross-ownership hasn't saved the Tampa Tribune from its slow demise, and the marketplace is unfair to small newspapers and radio stations. Let me first explain my perspective, which is heavily influenced by my heritage. La Gazzetta is my family's newspaper. It was started by my grandfather Victoriano in 1922 as a 6-day-a-week Spanish-language daily. He started because Latins in Tampa were underserved and ignored by mainstream media like the Tampa Tribune. In the Deep South, with all of its racism, the Latin community had to serve itself with its own banks, cafes, bodegas, clubs, hospitals, and newspapers. La Gazzetta started its life providing Latin news from the Latin perspective, writing about our births, deaths, and everything in between. We served our community and fought for it to achieve equality, respect, and power. My father, Roland, took over the cause, adding English and Italian to the newspaper, and now, 11 years after his passing, I still try to follow in my father and grandfather's footsteps. Media General's cross-ownership and radio mega-owners are threatening to end minority-owned and controlled, minority-targeted media. Tampa Tribune, St. Petersburg Times, Miami Herald, and most newspapers have already, through a bizarre and flawed business plan, cheapened the value of real news with the next generations of Americans by offering for free news that was paid for by an older generation of Americans. This plan of creating readership by giving it away was a leap of faith that somehow, some way, it would lead to profit. I have watched for 20 years while this grand experiment was conducted, and I have seen it lead to the ruin of my industry. The Tampa Tribune's foray into the Spanish language media market followed the same failed experiment. Tampa Tribune Media General starts publication Centro 4 years ago. If it would have researched, it would have found out that if it takes all of the advertising revenue from all of Tampa's Spanish-language newspapers and doubled it, it would not have made a blip on the Tribune's financial bottom line. The newspaper was started as a free publication, which it remains, and a lot of its advertising was, and still is, given away for free. Centro has not been a profitable enterprise. This leaves us to questions the motives of the expansion. Was it merely to fill a hole in the total market coverage net of the Tampa Tribune, WFLA-TV, and TBO cross-ownership? The leverage of having the county's major daily newspaper and a TV station allows their representatives to get in the door of major advertisers where single publication enterprises like mine are barred. The convenience of single billing and a budget to cover TV, English print, Spanish print, and Internet gives cross-ownership an advantage small enterprises find difficult to compete against. The sales pitch often throws in these two products for free or at a very reduced cost, giving the advertiser the impression that these add-ons have little cost and value. Advertising in Centro is what the industry calls value added. Sales representatives use it, and the advertising on TBO, the Tampa Tribune's websites, as gimmicks to enhance purchasing of advertisements in the Tampa Tribune. CBS Radio, which owns the only Spanish-language FM station, WYUU, does the same thing by bundling the FM Spanish as part of larger buys for its cluster of English-language stations and television station WTOG. The net result from these practices is to make the perception of Spanish-language advertising to be cheap, or worse, free. This devalues my industry and my community. The Latin community isn't some gimmick. It isn't some kind of trinket to be added to a gift bag handed out to clients. Centro and YUU can afford to sell themselves as cheap or free because of the deep pockets of their parents. Media General's cross-ownership allows for such practices, as does CBS' vast network. My words would be self-serving if the evidence showed that Centro and YUU had taken up the cause to bring equality, respect, and power to the Latin community. They do not. They are minor parts of a larger picture to control markets and keep out competition. If the giants win and Spanish-language publications like La Gaceta and Spanish AM stations disappear, the community will lose. Centro does not build Latin political power or influence, as they refuse to endorse political candidates or causes, failing even to be critical of large media that have anti-Hispanic agendas. WYU mainly relegates community programming to early Sunday morning, while the AMs make time during the week to talk of issues and events important to the Latin community. The promise of cross-owners and conglomerates are not reality. The Tampa Tribune is fading away at a faster rate than most dailies, even with the heft of a television station at its side. Radio has no diversity of voice. It's either salacious or blaring out of the right speaker only. The minority community has a tough enough time surviving, then assimilating, and finally prospering on its journey to the American dream. This immigrant cause is aided and given voice by minority media. Please don't give the giants the tools to undermine that cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to move down the panel to ask John Schuler, who is the president of the Florida Communications Group for Media General, to go next.
Well, good afternoon. My name is John Schuler, and I am the Florida market leader for Media General. This means that I'm in charge of all of Media General's Florida operations, and on behalf of Media General, I want to welcome the Commission to Tampa. We're delighted the FCC has chosen Tampa to hold a workshop on media ownership, We think that there's a lot of important lessons to be learned from what we are accomplishing in this market. And I'll note, too, that we were happy to host a number of FCC officials this morning for a tour of our converged multi-platform news center in downtown Tampa. We firmly believe that what they saw at the news center this morning is the future of media in this nation, and we think that future is bright. I'd like to elaborate on that a bit in these comments. We have also pre-filed a 20-page written statement that supplements what I'll have to say here. I mentioned that I'm in charge of the Media General's Florida operation. They're very intentionally across a number of media platforms. They include, as you've heard, the Tampa Tribune, WFLA, our web portal, tbo.com, our mobile site, m.tbo.com, and other daily and weekly newspapers, each with their own website. I'm also in charge of Centro, which is a media group in its own right. We started Centro as an online initiative in 2005 to cover Tampa Bay's Hispanic community, and we reverse published it, which means that we started with an online version and then we launched a print edition. Today, Centro is the largest Spanish-language newspaper in Tampa Bay. It is home delivered, and it has audited weekly circulation of nearly 40,000. I'll discuss Centro more in a couple of minutes. I mention it now because there is so much consternation in the state of the media business, and Centro's success shows exactly what the private sector can do in this business, in our communities, and ultimately for our nation. Let me start, though, with a little background on Media General. We own 18 network-affiliated television stations in 21 newspapers located primarily in the Southeast. Each of these properties has one, and more likely more than one, website. We also own several interactive advertising enterprises, including Adver Gaming and Entertainment Company, an online coupon and shopping company, and a wireless mobile marketing company. There's lots of talk across all industries about being customer-focused, and we've taken that just a little bit farther in Media General. We know that the customer is in charge, and if we don't serve our markets well, we will fail. 3 significant things came together for Media General last year. First, as the Commission knows, we've for years pursued a multiple platform media approach. That started here in Tampa, where the Tampa Tribune put WFLA TV on the air in 1955. Over time, we grew to understand the importance of combining the content breadth of a newspaper and the immediacy of a television. And over time, also, we added depth from the web. We saw, too, that we could pair back office and fixed expenses to focus instead on delivering more high-quality news and information to the community. We pursued that model as a business strategy, and now we have secured permanent waivers from the Commission in other similar combinations in the Tri-Cities market in Western Virginia and Eastern Tennessee, in the Columbus, Georgia market, where we also own print publications in Auburn and Opelika, Alabama, and in Myrtle Beach in Florence, South Carolina, where we have another successful newspaper-television combination. Second, we realized last year that in our work in Tampa, we've proved something beyond about media companies' organizational structures that we could apply across all operations. Most companies with multiple media platforms organize themselves by platform. That is, that they have a publishing division, a broadcast division, or an internet division. Indeed, Media General itself was organized that way, except here in Florida. But here, we've been managing our operation together since 2005. We realized in 2009 that our Tampa model was better. The third thing last year was this horrific, horrible economy. We knew we had been experiencing permanent secular changes as the internet became more and more important to consumers as a way to find the information they need to organize their lives. But last year's rapid downturn in this economy added urgency to the way we viewed our company. The economy became a catalyst to help accelerate change. And we moved from being merely a customer-focused organization to recognize that the customer is in charge. So on July 1st of last year, we transformed our platform-based structure into 5 geographic market segments. They are, number 1, Virginia, Tennessee, number 2, North Carolina, number 3, Mid-South, which includes South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, number 4, Columbus, Ohio, and Providence, Rhode Island, where we have television stations, and of course, number 5, Florida. This organizational change is important. It means that our market leaders are now managing all the resources in the region, no matter what the delivery platform. That allows us to move closely to connect with existing customers, create new opportunities for new customers, and to expand organically to fill in some of the open spaces in our map. We view this as a natural extension of our mission, which is to be the leading provider of high-quality news and information and entertainment in the Southeast by continually building on our position of strength in strategically located markets. The Commission and the audience here this afternoon know that for local media like ours, appointment journalism is dead. A subscriber used to have to wait until we deliver the newspaper to his or her door at 5:30 in the morning. A television viewer would have to wait until 6 or the 11 p.m. newscast to find out what was happening in town. Those days are gone. Appointment journalism has been replaced by a continuous news cycle. We are a 24/7 news operation. Our journalists are out in the field with laptops, video cameras. They're filing stories and video remotely throughout this 24-hour cycle to provide local news and information whenever and however our customers want it. This, combined with our trusted brands, makes Media General platforms in Tampa and elsewhere the go-to place for local news. We use social media networking, those tools, to help us collect local news and information, and the news results reflect those conversations with our community. We know this multi-platform model works. It gives our communities what they need by connecting advertisers to our local audience. It allows us to fund a local news gathering efforts, and make no mistake, it is very, very expensive to gather, edit, and disseminate local news. Over the last couple of years, we had to match our cost structure with the revenues that are available in our markets. Overall, that meant we had to reduce our workforce from about 7,100 people down to 5,200. We've made similar sized reductions here in Tampa. And boy, I want to tell you, it has been painful, but it's also been necessary. And today we see signs that advertising spending is firming somewhat, and it gives us a strong position from which to innovate and grow, all focusing on our franchise, which is local. Centro is a good example of local innovation. Our research showed that there might be an opportunity to serve a diverse Spanish-speaking and reading audience. So it became easier and, more importantly, cheaper to launch a web product that was going to be a fully fledged print product. We experimented with the site that we gathered, organized news and information and displayed that, and that was relevant to the 10 principal Spanish language communities in Tampa. We then refined our thinking over time, and we launched a Centro website. Seeing good acceptance from our Hispanic community and from the advertisers that want to reach those consumers, we launched our weekly Centro newspaper that today has become the leading Spanish language publication in the Tampa Bay market. That is one example of a local market-based innovation. Media General's innovation, and its hallmark for that, of course, is our work with common ownership of newspapers and television stations in the same market. We very intentionally used Tampa as a laboratory more than a decade ago to find ways to bring our print and broadcast journalists together to provide better news and information, and to provide Tampa with faster and more complete news. The rest, they say, is history. I know you'll have some questions about what we're still developing and accomplishing here, and I'll be happy to do my best with answers. The final point I'd like to make with these brief comments, I know that the FCC and indeed people in Washington would like to prescribe a way to fix journalism. Now, our industry is definitely in transition. My experience here and our company's successes in the Southeast, including the recent Pulitzer Prize for Public Service Award to our Bristol newspaper in Virginia. This makes me an optimist about our ability to continue to provide high-quality news to communities of all sizes, if the government would only get out of the way. What we've accomplished here with our multimedia approach enables us to consistently reach over 80% of the adults in the DMA. It's a testament to what the private sector does best. That's because we're customer-focused, we're creative, innovative, and risk-taking, and that's just what this industry needs. To quote former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice on her time in Washington, she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I just spent 8 years in Washington, and Washington, D.C. is a lot of things, but creative, innovative, and risk-taking, not so much." This is simply not the time, the place, or the industry for a Washington prescription. I appreciate your invitation to tell you about our Tampa experience, and I'm happy you're here. I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you very much. I think we will hear next from Bernard Lunzer, the president of the Newspaper Guild and the vice president of Communications Workers of America.
Thanks. I want to thank the FCC for this hearing, for this opportunity to speak on this vital topic affecting all of us, the future of journalism. My organization, the Newspaper Guild, a sector of the Communications Workers of America, directly represents over 28,000 media workers and more than 15,000 journalists in North America, mostly print. Roughly one-fourth of our journalists are in broadcast. Many of our print journalists are deeply involved with related web products, and many are being asked to shoot video as a routine part of their job. We are here today specifically looking at cross-ownership models, most of which were grandfathered in prior to restrictions that were put in place. Tampa has one of those examples which you've just heard about. Based on a study by Free Press, the market in Tampa is highly concentrated, with 4 firms controlling 73% of the market and 1/3 controlled by Media General. If the FCC removes its few current ownership restrictions, it's estimated that the top 4 firms in Tampa would control 85% of the market. First, let's ask whether the integration and consolidation of platforms is inevitable. The increasing dominance of the Internet suggests that it is a reality. It's something we're going to have to accept. As I've said, most of our journalists are preparing to or are already delivering integrated products. Technology will continue to speed this up, and we welcome experimentation as we find new ways to deliver news. Currently, our union is sponsoring a training program to teach video skills to its members. We've invested $175,000 in a mobile lab that crisscrosses the country doing video training. We consider it vital to our members' future and the future of their products. Our journalists welcome these challenges. They like crowdsourcing, blogging, and the overall interaction that the Internet provides. They understand that this forever changes, and we know changes what was once a one-way system that fed readers what others decided. So we're far from Luddites trying to stop new ideas and the promise of the Internet. Yet, we remain extremely concerned that something important and vital to democracy is being lost. The web has devastated the revenue model that print journalism depended on, and a relative few newspaper sites are delivering 10% of their operations revenue. Even the New York Times, which seems like a bedrock institution with a wonderful website, is having extreme financial hardship. Will cross-platform products that roll up current broadcast and print be the salvation? There's no evidence of this, and all current consolidations seem to point in the opposite direction. Most consolidations are being done for efficiencies, and that means less content, fewer journalists, and less diversity in both content and staff. Again, pointing to the Free Press study, while 24% of the Tampa TV audience represents racial and ethnic minorities, and 48% of the population of the city of Tampa is comprised of minorities, only 13% of the area's commercial broadcast ownership is minority-owned. I'll point out that that is a number that's better than many markets, but it's still not good. ASNE has just published a report, as you heard Karen talk about, showing that after all the buyouts and layoffs of the last 2.5 years, the number of newspaper workers of minority status has dropped from 7,400 in 2007 to 5,500 in 2010. That takes the percentage down to 13.26 of the workforce. Papercuts.org, a reliable site based on our sampling of their numbers, reports that since 2008, the industry has lost just short of 34,000 jobs. In general, the newsrooms we represent have been shrunk by at least 1/3, several by half. So we have a loss of actual jobs and a drop in diversity at a time when the country is becoming more diverse. We're also right now looking at new data, and this is just in the infancy, that is suggesting that women, the number of women in newsrooms is actually dropping, which concerns us greatly. Lack of diversity in newsrooms and in ownership should be a cause for alarm. Any hope for these news organizations depends on their relevancy to the populations they serve. Where we've seen clustering, joint ownership across the region, like in San Jose and the East Bay of San Francisco, the number of journalists has dropped precipitously after amalgamation. The Contra Costa Times, Oakland Tribune, and the former Alameda News Group has gone from roughly 300 journalists in 2007 to 180 currently. The Mercury News, which has been added to this media cluster, has lost over 200 jobs in news. This is the way that mergers become more efficient. In broadcast, we're watching several cities like Honolulu, where one news crew provides commentary and video to several stations. Initial examination shows that this is not resulting in more news, just fewer media workers. Is journalism a public good? I think that most of us here on the panel would agree that it is. We likely don't know or wouldn't agree on solutions to the current crisis. Some would point out that we've lived through other difficult times with highly partisan media and yellow journalism. Some say we can let the market sort it out this time. Many point to the explosion of unpaid or highly underpaid writers. Some are bloggers, opinionators of some kind, and some are more like traditional journalists, fact-based with at least a nod to objectivity. This is all good. In many cases, the opinion side of the aisle can and does still provide original information that wouldn't otherwise be available. But where it is pure spin, it often relies on what is now called legacy media for facts. There's a place for this, but in and of itself, opinion does not create a more informed citizenry. In fact, the recent Pew report found that 80% of the traffic to news and information sites is concentrated at the top 7% of all sites, and that the vast majority of the top news sites, 67% moreover, are still tied to legacy media. When we hear people claim that there are all these new ways to get information, they should recognize that diversity of delivery does not create diversity of content. We have a strongly divided society in this first decade of the 21st century. If we wind up with an information dark ages where sports, entertainment, and opinion rule with little in the way of what we now consider hard news, the American experiment will not benefit. Democracy will suffer. So let's talk about solutions. Let's acknowledge that from where we sit, it's hard to know what the answers will be. We at the Guild believe that any solutions must reward content creators and create more genuine information. We're not suggesting saving print. We want to save news organizations and encourage the growth of new ones. There are multiple ways to do this that are being discussed. Vouchers to citizens to pay for media of their choice, tax credits for working journalists, or tax credits for employing journalists. Some have suggested a government endowment that would indirectly provide real capital to public and nonprofit journalism, online and off. It's wrong to say that government doesn't have a role. The government is us, and we have to decide if this public good is worth saving and promoting. There can be tax breaks for low-profit news organizations as well. This is not a panacea, but it's a good idea. There should be indirect ways for communities to own papers. Call it the Green Bay Packers model. Aggregators and paid search companies should have an obligation to invest in content in meaningful ways. They should at least pay for the content they currently feed off of for their advertising and revenue. I have my concerns about paywalls, but if search and aggregation made micropayments based on the content they use, a much more fair internet would result. News organizations should be able to negotiate together with web portals as to free use and fair use. While some, like Google, have benefited greatly during the period of mixing legacy media and new media, they will ultimately choke content and have less and less to search. They should care very much about this problem. Experimenting with mixtures of media, such as those being discussed today, are important. But if all the FCC does is lift the cross-ownership ban entirely, it will have done nothing to preserve or promote quality information. In fact, it will speed up the demise of journalism while preserving a cash flow for some. We, all of us, need to work on bold, innovative ideas. We need to act within the next 2 years if we want quality journalism to be around mid-century. It's no longer hyperbole. We're in the meltdown phase. But working together, we can find answers. I know that continued consolidation is not the answer. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Ken Tonning, who is the president and general manager of WTSP, Gannett Company, the CBS affiliate in St. Petersburg.
Good afternoon to all of you, to our FCC representatives, and I'll add my welcome back to the Tampa Bay area. My name is Ken Tonning, and I'm here on behalf of WTSP, Channel 10, the CBS affiliate for the Tampa-St. Petersburg viewing area. WTSP also operates an all-weather station on its digital multicast stream and 10connect.com, an interactive news website with mobile and iPhone distribution platforms. In addition, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Florida Association of Broadcasters. I'm happy to be here with you this afternoon and to share our thoughts on the state of local news and public affairs coverage in the Tampa-St. Petersburg community. At WTSP, we believe local news is our lifeblood. Many journalists, all of our journalists live and report it, and our viewers demand it. For example, we are 4.5 hours of news live every day of the week, and as well as providing content for our digital channel and our 3 owned websites. We also produce an hour-long daily program that includes a public affairs segment where local nonprofit agencies talk to public about their services. In just the last few weeks, we've covered local stories like the Hillsborough County's decision to demolish the Friendship Trail Bridge, an investigation into a traffic incident regarding St. Petersburg former police chief, state education reform, and a competitive Republican primary for Florida's Senate seat. In August of last year, we aired a special debate in prime time for the St. Petersburg mayor. We're interacting with our audience in a number of other ways as well. For example, our weekend night anchor, Heather Van Nest, hosts a popular blog about healthy eating and lifestyle, and our main site, our Facebook, and family websites all provide round-the-clock local news and interactive viewer discussions. WTSP is privileged to serve our local community through the granting of significant funds to local 501c3s. Those organizations are funded through our company foundation. Since 1997, we've granted over $720,000 to local nonprofit organizations such as the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, the Eckerd Youth Alternatives, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Hospice, the Literacy Council, Kids Voting Tampa Bay, and the R Club, a reading program for underprivileged children. These grants have improved the lives of disadvantaged children and families throughout the Tampa-St. Petersburg market. And we work to meet our community's immediate needs as well. After last fall's cold snap, we held an impromptu clothing drive that collected a semi-truck full of clothes that were immediately sent to homeless centers that same night. Our local staff are committed members of the community and volunteer hundreds of local hours in public service. Since 2001, our weeknight anchor has set aside the 10th of each month as a Lifetime Friends Day, bringing viewers special stories relating to breast cancer awareness, prevention, treatment, and recovery. Our morning anchor supports her weekly Wednesday's Child Profile of special needs foster children by hosting an annual Adoption Appreciation Picnic and coverage of Adoption Day celebrations in the area. The FCC has asked us to discuss newspaper broadcast cross-ownership and how it affects competition in the Tampa-St. Petersburg market. From WTSP's perspective, we compete against Media General's news operation for stories, viewers, and advertisers every day, as well as a dozen TV stations, another dozen daily newspapers, 2 full-time cable news operations, and a countless number of other websites covering Tampa-St. Petersburg and the rest of our viewing area. We think we're doing a fine job, and the readings over the last year have indicated that we are, in fact, growing a loyal audience in this market where a cross-ownership situation does exist. We have work-sharing arrangements of our own that have allowed us to deliver better local news coverage for our viewers. For example, our parent company owns newspapers in Fort Myers, Brevard, Tallahassee, and Pensacola. We've partnered with these papers to cover the latest space shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral, providing our viewers across the state and in the Tampa market with the most comprehensive coverage of any station in the market. These arrangements also allow us to cover stories up and down the Atlantic coast, stories we would be unable to do independently in such depth. And we also have a shared news service with the Fox and the Scripps stations here in Tampa, whereby each station staffs local news share operations independent of its station newsroom. We share both ground coverage and air coverage, and the news services distributes video among the 3 stations for use in our individual reports. This way we can cover the news of the day, from an official press conference to a Rays opening day at Tropicana Field, without overstaffing events or creating air congestion, and thus saving news resources for investigative and enterprise reporting in the process. The Florida Association of Broadcasters provides other opportunities for broadcasters to collaborate on the range of statewide issues and emergency broadcast services. For many years, the FAB has had a relationship with FEMA where the agency works with FAB to ensure that severe weather and emergency preparedness information goes out throughout the state as soon as possible when the need arises. The FAB also works on litigation, lobbying issues that directly affect broadcasters, issues that directly affect our ability to report local news, but the stations don't have the time or the resources to take on individually. Another issue that the FCC has asked us to consider is the effect of cross-ownership on the content of local news coverage in our market. A competitor may get to a story first because of cross-ownership synergies, news-gathering partnerships, or otherwise, but there's nothing preventing another station from covering that same story in its own way. In Tampa, we compete fiercely for exclusives. I've never worked with journalists who've pounded the pavement harder to get those stories. But exclusives are not exclusive forever. Anyone who's worked in a newspaper or a TV newsroom knows that at noon there's a TV set somewhere turned on to a rival station news broadcast, and a local news desk editor is reading a competitor's metro section to see what stories it may have missed. We all think that we do the best job of covering the issues that are important to our viewers. But it's resources, news smarts, financial resources, knowledge of our community, and not government regulation that drives our ability to compete with each other for local news. So my takeaway point is this. In today's environment, we're competing minute by minute with free websites and subscription services like cable, and advertising dollars are fleeing from the local market to other news platforms. Broadcasters need the flexibility to enter into agreements that allow them to effectively and efficiently cover local news in their markets. When we can provide more local programming, more in-depth investigative journalism, and better community services, our stations get stronger. But more importantly, the viewer wins. Thank you again for coming to Tampa, and I'm happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. Finally, we'll hear from Sandy Wilson, who is the Vice President of Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Cox Enterprises.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, I just got back from NAB, spending some time with our senior leaders, and I know I speak for all of them when I say we're really glad to be here. So thank you so much for inviting us. I provided a lot of written detail in my written statement about Cox and our long history. We've actually been in business for over 100 years, so there's lots to say, and I will try and just hit some highlights in 10 minutes. I thought I might start at the beginning, actually. It's sort of an interesting story. Cox was founded, as I said, over 100 years ago by an Ohio school teacher and reporter who had a love for the news business, and he bought his first paper in 1898. He was only 28. He bought a paper he called the Dayton Daily News. And the first thing he did was kick out all of the romantic stories and start filling it with hard news. And I think that really showed his early commitment to really providing local service to the community. He also went on to become a pretty popular and famous politician. He was actually a 3-term governor of Ohio, and he even ran for president in 1920 with FDR. But his mindset about being a public servant and be a newspaperman were the same. He just really believed in connecting to and serving the local community. And that mindset has really stayed with Cox through all of these years. So, but in addition to that kind of focus on the local community, he was also very interested in new technologies. And that's actually that curiosity about how a new media might help him serve the local community is what led to us having 2 cross-ownership situations today. We've got cross-owned properties in Dayton and Atlanta. And just to give you a sense of how long we've been serving those communities, in Dayton, we rolled out radio in 1935, and in Atlanta, 1939, and then we were the first to bring television to Atlanta in 1948, and the first to bring television to Dayton in 1949. And importantly, and this was really something that the governor was very insistent on, each of those independent outlets spoke with their own voice. So fast forward to today, what does Cox look like? We've got newspapers in Atlanta, Dayton, Austin, and Palm Beach. On the TV side, we've got 15 stations in 11 markets. On the radio side, we've got 86 stations in 19 markets, including 6 across the bay in St. Pete. I will say that, I won't bore you with all the details, but they have really won a lot of awards and really very focused through all those years on providing high-quality local news and information. But I wouldn't want to say that we've stopped innovating and investing. Like my colleagues here in the industry, we've focused a lot on the online space. We have local websites for all of our media properties. We have over 100 employees who are actually working in the digital space for us. We also have extensive in-house research capabilities, which we think is really critical. That's a really important way of making sure that you're constantly asking your customers what they want and then trying to provide it to them. So we think of ourselves as a new media company as well as a traditional media company. Just to tell you a little bit about our experience with cross-ownership, what has it been? I mean, I think the short answer is that our cross-owned newspapers and broadcast stations in Dayton and Atlanta have really provided exceptional service to their local communities, but they haven't stifled competition. As I said, they've been around for a long time, but today in Atlanta, there are 143 traditional media voices that are owned by 72 different entities, and that doesn't count cable, satellite, or the internet. And in Dayton, which is clearly a smaller market, it's 70 traditional media voices owned by 31 different companies. And again, not counting cable, satellite, or the internet. But I'd also like to know, the question might come up, well, is cross-ownership critical to our success? And the answer is no. We're really sort of in the news business. So it doesn't determine the amount of news that we produce. Some of our stations in other markets where we don't have a cross-owned property produce just as much news as those in Dayton and Atlanta. And in fact, we obviously we compete in a lot of markets where we don't have a cross-ownership relationship against cross-owned properties, and we do just fine there as well. So this is all a good news story, forgiving that pun. But obviously, Cox has been hit with the same disruptive forces that other panelists have talked about, in a terrible economic environment and a lot of challenges from the web, even though we are very much in the online space. So just wanted to chat with you a little bit about how we've responded. We have had to downsize. It's been very painful. We've sought efficiencies where at all possible. We've tried very hard, however, to preserve our ability to continue to produce high-quality news. Anybody who's involved in generating professional journalism knows it's expensive, but we clearly think it's worth it. And we're also trying some new things. We've pulled all of our non-cable media businesses under one roof. We've created a new division, Cox Media Group, it's called. And our business leaders in there are sort of working across and out of their traditional silos to really start thinking in innovative ways about how to plot the future for our media companies. And we're trying some greater collaboration and some restructuring among our cross-owned properties in Dayton, not unlike some of the things that are being tried here or have been done here in Tampa. And we do think that trying to get more efficient by consolidating the back office functions will help us keep reporters and sales staff on the street. We are not cutting back on the number of journalists, but we're really trying to provide a better and richer news experience to our customers and more advertising options, frankly, for the local businesses that we serve. So since we got the FCC organized this panel, I thought I might talk a little bit about some of the policy suggestions that we might have that you might think about as you're sort of analyzing the cross-ownership situation. We really do hope that you will end up recommending government policy that really promotes innovation and investment and doesn't sort of just fall back on old stereotypes and old thinking. There are some good examples of pro-innovation government policies, and I go back actually to the days when government policy encouraged newspapers to get into the broadcast business because they really wanted somebody to incubate those new services to bring them to the public. So that's a perfect example. But another one, more recently, is the 1996 Telecom Act, which removes some of the barriers to entry between cable and telephone. And Ashley Cox has a large cable division, and we are duking it out there. We got into the voice business, and the phone companies have gotten into the video business, and now we're both into broadband and into wireless. And I think removing those regulatory barriers has really unleashed great competitive juices, and all to the benefit of customers. So what would a pro-innovation policy look like in today's media marketplace? Well, we are in favor of eliminating the newspaper broadcast cross-ownership rule. We do think that antitrust law obviously is always a backstop to deal with any competition issues that might arise. And we really encourage the government not to stand in the way of new revenue streams. There is lots of things are being tried. Cox is constantly innovating and investing. We're very committed to mobile DTV. We're exploring targeted advertising. I mean, there are just lots of things that companies can be doing and are doing, and we would definitely want a government mindset that encourages that as opposed to throwing up barriers to that. I would really hope that you wouldn't draw a line between old and new media. I hope if you take anything away from Cox's history, that it's that successful companies innovate all the time, even over the centuries. And then last but by no means least, I think regulators and policymakers really need to keep First Amendment values paramount. We are all very concerned about what's going on in the news media today. We're all committed and very supportive of the idea of continuing to have a very vibrant professional journalism. But when it comes to government policy, we just have to be very mindful that whatever is done is very targeted and is non-content based. So again, thank you very much for the invitation, for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for all of your excellent presentations. So we're going to move now to question period, and I would like to start by asking Mr. Schuler to respond to some of the points that were made by Mr. Montega about the Media General or the consolidated business model undermining minority-owned media.
Well, we researched the community, and we talked to folks who were immigrating both from out of the country and from other parts of the United States into Tampa. And we discovered that there was an underserved market for those people who were interested in having a newspaper for Spanish-speaking and Spanish-reading folks. We tested the model first with an interactive site, created an official Centro site that does things that others don't do and fulfills important issues for those consumers from other countries. 10 other countries to be exact, which is on Centro's site. It is a profitable operation, and we feel good about the fact that the audience acceptance of that with audited circulation has been a benefit to the Hispanic community. And that is part of the role that we play, is to increase the sources of news, increase the dissemination of news through a variety of platforms. And we certainly cannot ignore a critical element of that community, which is the Hispanic community. So I'm not bashful about the fact that we've done well from a business perspective, but let's remember where it started from. It started because there was a need in the market, and we worked to satisfy that need.
My understanding of part of his argument is that the size of Media General and its converged nature enables Media General to underbid on ad rates, and that is essentially pushed downward pressure on the ad rates for their publication.
We don't underbid rates. We talk to advertisers. We are within whether or not it's a CPM model for the distribution of preprints or it's an ROP model where advertisers are going to pay what the distribution of the newspaper provides, and that is a ready audience for those advertisers. Many of the differences that you hear is the amount of circulation that we provide versus other Spanish language newspapers, not just La Gaceta, but Siete Dias as well. And we have very targeted home delivery circulation, which is quite valuable, and we charge for it. Otherwise, Centro would not be a successful publication.
And Mr. Montega, did you have any other comments that you wanted to make in response?
We have always welcomed other Spanish language newspapers in the market, and when Central first came out, we had welcomed them also because the market is a tough one to serve. It's spread out, it's diverse over several counties. What has been disappointing is the fact that they will not act as a voice. While they are happy to try and get revenue stream and to try and talk to their advertisers about spending money on that market, what we don't see is a willingness to provide any editorial voice. And I think that that's what minority communities really need. Minority medias are the true alternative newspapers. You've heard that term, and it normally talks about some sort of a city publication, an urban feel. Well, in reality, it's African-American papers and it's Hispanic papers because we've been providing a very our view of the world and our view of the news. And while Centro started off with this promise, the reality is that they will not get involved in the politics of our town. The Tampa Tribune does, and the Tampa Tribune has an Anglo voice, but Centro does not have a Hispanic voice, and that is part of the problem. The other thing is that while Centro where it seems to be, and I've been observing the community for a long time, what seems to be happening is they're becoming a wrapper for inserts. Half the newspaper is inserts. And what happens down the road is you start to lose competition. If you really are becoming a delivery vehicle for inserts, you will have less and less news pages because news pages are a basic formula for the amount of advertising you have. No advertising, no news pages, a lot of advertising, a lot of news pages. So, at the end of the day, I think people who've been in the industry for a while can look at this publication and can understand that we're not gaining a voice, and at the end of the day, we could be losing some voices and replacing it with just a vehicle for inserts.
Doesn't the fact that they've attracted a certain amount of audience prove that they do have voice?
Well, their delivery point is to Hispanic last names, Hispanic surnames. So whether you speak Spanish or not, you could end up with a Spanish language newspaper. It's a very simple way of delivering mail or delivering anything else, but it's not a very scientific way of doing it. So while they're hitting the driveways of 40,000 homes, there's no guarantee that any of those homes have Spanish-speaking people in them. So they've also shrank from their original market share. When they started off, they were delivering in several counties. They backed off from that. So, like I said, if Centro would belly up to the table and provide a voice for the community, a strong voice for pushing for fair county commission district, for pushing for Hispanic candidates, for pushing for those things that our community needs in the long run, I wouldn't be here.
I would have to say that the Centro, by its very nature, is the central spot for Hispanics from different cultures and regions to come together, which makes the editorial commentary a much different set of circumstances for a newspaper that's trying to bring together a Hispanic community of many, many different countries. It is delivered to people who self-identify themselves as people who want to read and receive a Spanish-language newspaper. And it is its success through the research that tells us and guides us in our discussions with them. In fact, if you looked at the staff of Centro, it looks like the United Nations. It is a very diverse staff from various countries in Latin America, and it is something that, again, the success of it stands on its own. You look at the success of Centro, and it's reaching a market that was underserved, and as a result of that, it was able to connect those audiences with advertisers in a successful manner.
Changing topics for a moment, John, you talked in your testimony that about the idea that convergence has significantly increased the output of news content and ensured the delivery of better, faster, and deeper local news. The number of journalists at Media General, I believe we heard earlier today, has dropped from about 400 to 290 during the economic times. Given the contraction in the number of journalists, how can you prove that you have increased the output and quality of journalism as a result of convergence?
If you look at the course of time, I mean, when we first converged, we added news resources. We added news resources both from a product standpoint, the community, weekly community newspapers, the Spanish language, all the other things that we've added with the local newspapers for the subdivisions, etc. But obviously, with the economic times being what they have been for the last 2 years, which has been horrific, we have not been immune from that. But what we have done is we've done a couple of things to help insulate ourselves from that. Number one is that we have utilized our assets in a way to reduce the infrastructure costs. For example, we print USA Today. We print the New York Post. We deliver the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, Financial Times, Investors Business Daily, to much of the DMA in this market, thereby leveraging the assets and the resources we have to help pay for themselves. So we could insulate our newsrooms and our journalists from further reductions. So that's been a significant benefit for it. Here's the other one. Most of our journalists are now to the point where they have multimedia skills. So instead of sending out a television reporter, a videographer, a still photographer, we can send out one multimedia journalist and be able to get stories, be able to bring them back or take them from the field, file them from the field, and be able to increase the effectiveness and the competency of our journalists. So those are two big items that have helped us, what I would call, narrow the gap between the hard decisions we had to make certain that we had a viable news operation going forward. I don't know of anybody else who has 290 journalists in this community.
Mr. Lonser, the drop in the number of journalists for Media General is about 27%, if my math is right. The average drop in journalists in the newspaper industry as a whole is somewhere between 30 and 33%. Wouldn't that indicate that Media General has been about the same or slightly better than the industry as a whole in terms of preserving the number of journalists?
Well, I guess, first of all, you'd have to, is the current climate acceptable? And I don't think it is. But yes, it does sound like they're in the same ballpark. I can't measure it in the sense that I don't really know where their staffing is, what they're covering. The biggest problem is that, so what we're being told is that fewer people doing more creates better journalism. And I'll tell you, in my experience, less is less. And there's been a lot less content, and the biggest problem is the public doesn't even see what's gone missing. I mean, and that's the real problem. So if a company as strong as Media General is still laying off this number of reporters, they're really not insulated. And then let me just add this last question. You know, what is the profitability? I don't know in this particular circumstance, but the problem in the industry, at least in the print side of the industry, and I'm sure it's true in broadcast, is that the profitability has been almost obscene over the years, 20 to 40% regular revenue. And so are they still chasing that same kind of revenue? Are they willing to, for a few years during the downturn, to make 8 or 9? I don't know, but I think they should be.
Sandy Wilson, you mentioned that Cox has some markets where you have cross-ownership, some where you don't. Has the fact of whether you have cross-ownership or not made a significant difference in the level of journalistic staffing in the communities?
No, I don't think so. We run each of our properties independently, as I said, and it's really only quite recently that we've even begun to explore collaboration among our cross-owned properties in Dayton. So we are providing a lot of news, actually, in all of our markets. It varies, of course, by market size, but most of our stations are the market leaders in news.
Thank you.
In the same vein, Mr. Tonning, Gannett has a combination of print and television in Phoenix. In this market, you compete against such a combination. I would like to ask whether you feel that in this market, is there any unfairness in being able to compete against someone who has a combination that you don't? And I guess the second half of the question would be, if you were allowed to, would you like to have a combination in this market as well?
Well, I can address competing against a cross-ownership situation, and I think it, in many ways, makes us all better. I know that WFLA has been formidable competition in the market for a long, long time. I compete, obviously, on the TV side of that. It makes us, in an effort to create the most relevant content where our viewers want it, when they want it, it makes us work harder. And as a result of that, I think it makes our content and what we do better in the process. If you asked me if there were a situation in the market where I could have the resources of an entire publishing operation to not only compete in today's environment, but also to prepare us to compete 10, 15, 20 years from now as this need and passion for content continues to increase, I would tell you, yes, I'd love to have that operation, that possibility.
I would like to just add a little footnote here. Despite the fact that 80% of adults in the DMA use our products, we only garner about 11% of the advertising revenue in the DMA. And that's not to say that of the 80%, that there are other publications that also are that reach the same audiences that we do, maybe not to the same extent. But I think the idea is that if we define ourselves by platform, we're going to make mistakes. If we define ourselves by serving a market and creating the outlets for that market to receive news and information whenever and however they want it, we will weather this storm and come out ahead of it. We will do better because we've got the ability and the pressure to innovate and to be risk takers.
Bob?
Oh, sorry. One of the questions is, it seems like all the broadcasters here are pretty much against government regulation of this particular cross-interest. Do you think there should be some limitation here? I mean, I realize the rule as it exists today is an absolute bar on newspaper broadcast cross-ownership. Should there be some limitation on combination? For instance, should the St. Petersburg Times and the Herald be owned together with the broadcast station? Would that be acceptable? Should we just get out of this business given the nature of newspaper business today, or is there some limit that should remain? And perhaps Sandy first?
Yeah, well, as I said briefly, I do think that there is as Bill actually pointed out when we started this, the Commission has three interests here: diversity of voices, localism, and competition. And I think that the Commission, having looked at this issue over the years, and hopefully will come to the same conclusion, that actually localism is furthered by cross-owned properties. And I certainly feel that the Cox experience proves that to be the case. Diversity of voices, I'm sure we could have a conversation around that, but those of us would think in the business, look at all of the outlets and all of the opportunities to hear any kind of point of view that you want, to say that, diversity is probably not the issue. So I think for us, it really becomes a competition issue, and I could imagine that there might be some circumstances in which, in a particular market, there are legitimate competitive concerns, and that's why you would want competition policy in the form of antitrust enforcement to continue to be there. But I think, at least as far as the newspaper broadcast cross-ownership restriction is concerned, we think this may actually be a time to go back to the idea of having, media working together in order to make sure that they can collectively continue to provide the kind of quality journalism that we've all want them to.
Any of the other, John or Mr. Tonning?
Well, I would agree that that's what we have antitrust regulation for. I think for a lot of the reasons that we've already discussed here today, the opportunity to combine resources to create the content that we need to create to keep us viable and relevant to our consumers, that we need to have the ability to look at any and all partnership opportunities going forward.
If I may, what I would say is that it would be nice if there were a way to separate these thoughts. It isn't so much the cross-platform that I'm worried about, because I think eventually the platform is going to be one platform. The problem is continued consolidation. And the truth of the matter is that further consolidation in fewer hands will represent a huge loss of diversity, and we've already got a problem. And just a word of warning, any such notion that antitrust laws are going to be helpful here, I would suggest that people talk with the Department of Justice right now. I mean, the truth of the matter is they have the same pressure as everyone else, and they are not, antitrust law is not going to protect the environment to save competition. It's just not.
And I would add some concerns about you're moving completely away from regulation. My preference, I guess, like others, would be that a bully pulpit would be sufficient, but that hasn't proven to be true. And so while there are some grounds to relax regulations, at least I think it's important to keep a very close eye, because as the situation shifts, there needs to be the ability to move back in and make a difference.
Jennifer?
I actually wanted to go back to Steve's question to Sandy. One of the arguments we hear a lot in support of cross-ownership is the efficiencies that cross-ownership result in. You mentioned that your stations where you don't have cross-ownership are doing just as much news as those where you do have cross-ownership, and it sounded like maybe there wasn't that much difference in Dayton and in Atlanta as in your other markets. So I was wondering if you thought that perhaps the efficiencies associated with cross-ownership are overstated.
I wouldn't say that they're overstated, because I do think that, I've got John here on the panel, and he's been operating his cross-owned properties in a way that has brought together some of those back office efficiencies, and that is in fact what we are implementing in Dayton. So the fact that Cox traditionally operated all of our outlets independently really doesn't actually go to the question in a way. And we do hope that through the restructuring that we've done in Dayton and the greater collaboration, that we will be able to sort of consolidate back office functions, whether it's administrative issues, marketing, not so much sales, but kind of wring out the inefficiencies where you can, so that you can actually keep as many journalists and sales staff on the ground as possible. So I do think the efficiencies are there. We may just not be at the point in time that others are.
We've heard examples of different sorts that paint very dramatically different pictures of what might happen. You have Mr. Lenzer gave examples from San Jose and East Bay of San Francisco, where he argued that sharing or consolidation had led to less journalism. Ms. Schuler has offered examples from Media General where he argued that the consolidation has led to more and better journalism. Others have, looked at what's happened in the radio area post-consolidation and argued that that led to less news. So if we start with the assumption that sometimes cross-ownership leads to greater journalism and sometimes it leads to less, as a public policy matter, how should the government construct public policy so that it is more likely to lead to the former and less likely to lead to the latter?
Well, I think one thing that deserves scrutiny is that especially if you go down the road of relaxation, we have to get, first of all, I don't view these communities as markets. I view them as communities. And I think when the airwaves were given away, there was a quid pro quo, and that there was a public responsibility that many of these stations were supposed to have. And I think that it's fair to expect a fair amount of local coverage. There are situations where school boards and important parts of communities and some communities of color are not getting any coverage whatsoever. So I think it's time to say, if you use the public airways, how do you pay back?
I think one of the things to look at is not anecdotal observations, but to look at the research. And all the research I know that Media General has done to look at converged markets that have multimedia environments to them, where newspapers and broadcast television stations have been together and have received waivers from the Commission, that indeed those operations have increased local news in those markets. Now, you've got an issue clearly with both secular and cyclical changes in the marketplace. Secular with people going to the web. If you look at Facebook and Twitter and you use those as potential leads and things that help generate stories, you're increasing the conversation that you have with your community. But I think to look at from the cyclical standpoint, we have all worked hard to figure out how to maintain as much of the news staff as we absolutely possibly can. It's something we worry about every day, but there is an economic reality. And when we see that the advertising is firming, those of us who care about the community, we call it markets or community, that's semantics. We care about localism. We care about providing local news and information. That is our lifeblood. If we don't do it well, with a variety of ways to going to market, we will fail. But in the instant issue, when you look at the research that's been done in converged markets, particularly those of Media General, compared to other markets, either higher in rank or lower in rank in terms of their market size, we have always found, and the Commission has found, that those markets have had more local news and information as a result of that convergence.
I think Professor Darden wanted to get in.
Thank you. I want to respond to just a few of these comments. I think words do matter. I'm coming from the academic side here, I know. With markets, you have consumers, and with communities, you have citizens. And much of what we see in the press, and I understand the economic circumstances, I do. Much of what you see is catering to consumers and not citizens. The idea that you have now a whole newsroom filled with reporters, most of the experienced ones already having been fired or laid off, and now you have most of the inexperienced ones, and they are far more able to take photographs, do video, do audio, do all of the various things that used to be done by several people. I don't think that results necessarily in better news. It can very often result in a much more shallow news because they're focusing on trying to do so much that they don't have time to get into any depth with any news. Secondly, the idea, I don't know where the arguments about more news is coming from. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the press that's more. If you look at the webpage of the St. Pete Times, you can look at The Juice, which is celebrity coverage. You can look at Whoa Mama, and I'm not quite sure what that is. You can look at 4 or 5 other categories that have enormously increased amount of information, but that's not an argument, and I know forgive me, the St. Pete Times wasn't making this argument, but that's not an argument for better news. I can create a hell of a lot more information. I can put a heck of a lot more things in the paper, which is what is occurring and on TV, but it's not necessarily better. Often it's much cheaper. It's fire, it's police, it's all these stories that come from places where reporters don't have to work to get them. Where, for example, is news about foreign policy, news about, I know it's there, but it's diminished, news about from international news, investigative reporting, all those things shown by reports, not just anecdotal, are diminished in the U.S. And that, I think, is got to be partly a result of a diminished staff, not only in numbers, but also in experience. I don't think cross-ownership is going to further local news. I don't see how that can further local news. What furthers local news, what furthers news in communities are more people in the communities participating in the news and creating that news, not one organization creating that news. Plus, the questions you guys are answering, there are a couple things. One, I really think you ought to talk to some of the reporters and not just the owners. I mean, the folks who publish these newspapers and who are the authorities there have different stories than the people that they hire and the people that they fired. And I think to find out more of that, of what they have to say, would be a very interesting, you'd get some very interesting information. Finally,
I would like to invite you over
excuse me.
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Finally, we're talking about cross-ownership as it is. And there are only a few places, as you've noted, where cross-ownership exists. Well, maybe conditions aren't so bad, but you start relaxing the rules of cross-ownership and you've got a whole different discussion. Now you don't have cross-ownership in a couple of markets. You'll have it all over the place, and I guarantee you the discussion will be entirely different.
I would like to invite you over to the News Center because I'd like you to see a couple of things. One is the staff. They are not all the people who just came out of J School. So many of the staff people that we have there are grizzled veterans of the print world or have been on television reporters a long time. They have increased their abilities, their skill sets, and they've done, I think, a terrific job of in-depth reporting, in-depth enterprise journalism that has a community outreach benefit to it, a significant amount of investigative reporting, and of course there is breaking news stories. The in-depth nature of it, I think we've spent a lot of time training our journalists to know what database, how to look through databases, how to create databases for citizen involvement, you called it. And we think that the interaction both on the social media side as well as giving people the tools to be more civically involved, both with the civic and political discourse, we think that has been a hallmark of what we've been able to do. That's more people in the community who have been involved in the news making. Yes, we're going to fact check. Yes, we're going to cooperate and collaborate with others to make sure that information is accurate. But I think if you spent time at our news center, and I very much would like you to, like many of the members of the FCC did today, you will see and talk to journalists. We did not just have them sitting in a boardroom. We had them out in the news center so they could see exactly what we go through and talk to the people who make the news.
I appreciate that. I've visited more than a dozen times at least. I was there really when you first started the whole internet operation back in the 90s. So I have visited a lot. You have some of my students, former students working there, and you have some of my former students who are no longer working there. And I've talked to a lot of them, but the last few visits to the newsroom, and I get the Tribune, by the way, at home, along with the Wall Street Journal, that you deliver both. It's a much emptier building than it used to be. I will say that.
That's one thing I was going to say. If you go to visit the news center, please go to every floor because there's some floors there that don't have anybody on them anymore. And the Tribune does have some good reporters. They do it in spite of the conditions, not because of them, though. Most of them are overworked, and they're struggling. They're struggling to post on the internet, and they have to make decisions all the time. Am I going to do 2 stories a day? Am I going to keep my blog up? And am I going to constantly post to the internet? So, these are difficult decisions. The FCC needs to demand more public programming. It needs to demand higher standards. We just really have given away the airwaves without asking anything in return. And I think that's where we really are making the mistake here. Whether it's whether you're going to give more to few stations, whether you're going to allow cross-ownership, you need to demand higher standards because we just don't have them today. There's really not a lot in return. We're getting the time that the radio is giving to public to the public is always on off hours. The same thing with the television stations. So that would, no matter what you do, please demand higher standards because anybody who picks up the Tribune today realizes it is a shadow of what it was 3 or 4 years ago. The Tampa Tribune, St. Pete Times reads the same. 95% of the news is exactly the same. There's people here who subscribe to Tribune. If it wasn't for the obituaries, there wouldn't be a whole lot of difference between St. Pete and Tampa. And that's a shame because this was a marvelous market with 2 strong newspapers, and I would like to see it continue with 2 strong newspapers and an effective minority media also.
I'd like to add a comment, if I may. In my opening statements, I referenced the local news share that we formed with Scripps and with Fox in this market about a year ago. The purpose of our local news share is to, instead of 3 of us sending out a crew to a press conference or to an opening pitch at a ballpark and all coming back with the same video or flying a helicopter and hovering over a warehouse fire and all returning with our helicopters to present the same video. It was to pool those resources on the necessary news of the day. As a result of that local news share, not one journalist lost their job in the process. What we did was redeploy so we can continue to do the type of journalism that this market expects. And I'll give you 3 really good examples. This past Saturday night, we aired a primetime special that was fronted by our main anchors that included investigative reporting, community issues, and was, if you missed it, it was a really fine hour of journalism. Tomorrow night in primetime at 9 o'clock, we're airing another hour special on the real estate situation in the Tampa Bay market. What can you do about it? How can you protect your interests? How can you protect your investment? And we'll include a panel of experts to help people find solutions to a very severe problem. And in another month or so, I would say maybe middle of June, we'll be airing another live special in prime time on hurricane preparation. So consolidation of resources does not necessarily mean that we are removing talented journalists from our staff. It's indeed allowing them to find the time to create the content that our viewers have expected of us over the years.
But you can share resources without owning them all, correct?
You can, sure. I mean, we found a way to do that, but it's very limited. Each of us in that share have 3 employees separate from the newsroom that cover that. We have 60 people in the newsroom who we would love to have ability to create greater content with.
So Mr. Tang has given an example where sharing had freed up resources to do more enterprise journalism instead of duplicative journalism. Does anyone else have on the panel have a perspective on whether that example is the norm or the exception?
I know that our sister sector at CWA, NABET, is tracking this very closely, and so we're going to have some data very soon, and we're tracking several markets to see whether or not it really does result in fewer photojournalists, video journalists, and also, broadcast journalists. We don't have most of these are fairly new. Most of the sharing only started in the last year and a half.
And most articles I read that involve some form of research in talking about investigative or enterprise journalism is that it's diminishing year by year. Now, I can't tie that, of course, directly to consolidation, but there's less of it now than there has been in the past.
And I would agree that the economic situation and the situation with media has been so devastating that it's hard to draw any distinctions because of cross-ownership or not. Just so much has been reduced.
I guess I want to return to the question I asked earlier, and I'm not sure everyone weighed in or answered it, but which is we've been talking and historically have talked about ownership rules as either on or off, or bigger or smaller. And I'm wondering if is a way of thinking about ownership rules that would make it more likely that it would lead to the sorts of convergence that leads to better journalism versus convergence rules that don't. You can say no. I won't be hurt.
No, I don't see how it can. The whole idea behind this has been that we are not currently. We have been demonstrating what can happen if government steps out of the way and allows these companies to make decisions that are in the best interest for the communities they serve. And I think there's a lot of conversation about what the media landscape is going to look like in the future. And all we know is that if companies don't innovate, if they don't have the ability to look at it not as a platform, but as the citizenry that we're trying to support, trying to increase their civic understanding, to help them improve the quality of their lives, regardless of the platform it goes out on, it seems to me it's a relic to think about how you would regulate that interaction between what everybody's been calling legacy media, knowing where the media proliferation is going. That there's so many sources, both inputs and outputs for media today. I mean, one of the things that we haven't talked about, and there's nobody on the panel, that has all these microsites, the hundreds of interactive sites, not just through bloggers, but they provide news and information of a community or an affinity group, and it's just exploding. So if media companies don't have the ability to innovate, to take risks, and that's what fosters the changes. That's what fosters innovation, the ability to do that. And I just don't see why it's necessary to regulate that more than it's been regulated before, even in this period from, 1975 to now, where there's not been really kind of a set of rules that allow companies to do what they do best, and that is to take risks. That is to innovate. That's why what we have demonstrated, I believe, and Media General believes, we have demonstrated that it can work and work well for the communities we serve. So I'd say no.
And I say yes. And don't take this personally, John, but I am really tired of anti-government rhetoric in this country. I mean, the government is us. And I think the public is the government. And if it's not, we need to fix that part. But the truth is, the public has a right to demand certain things, especially in this case where the public airwaves are involved. I think if your question is, can there be compromises? I mean, I negotiate for a living. I'm sure there's some middle ground that could be found. The question is, what would you do? What would you ask? I think that the thing that's being missed here is that there is a crisis out there. I mean, from some people on the panel, you wouldn't think so, but I mean, I really see a major crisis, and I'm concerned that if something isn't done in the next couple of years, I don't even know that the business model that may be succeeding for a few of these people on the stage, I don't know that it's going to work at all, either in broadcast or in print. And so I think that if you want to talk about innovation and new ideas, I think there is a place for government to play a role. Right now, ProPublica, which is a great site, is there because a millionaire benefactor gave them $10 million. I don't know how long that money will be there. Well, now, last week I listened to a story done by ProPublica about Magnetar in Chicago, and it's a story about how markets don't work. So you'll hear that the free market is always, the invisible hand of the free market will take care of us. You can't believe that after 2008, after Goldman Sachs and this Magnetar story, and that came from ProPublica. We need to find ways to permanently fund things like ProPublica so that they have a revenue stream, not content. We're not trying to get into content. A free press means that the government doesn't get involved in content. It doesn't mean that the government doesn't help to create a good free press.
But as you pointed out, you're in a crisis situation, and in a crisis situation, isn't there a logic to allowing more flexibility to companies to try innovative approaches?
Well, a lot of their flexibility at this time is going with formulas. They're going back to old formulas. When you look at radio stations, it's just one after another repeating the same thing. When you're looking at the newspapers, you're not seeing a lot of innovation. They're falling back into more entertainment and less news. They're going the exact opposite way you would like them to go.
Well, I'd have to ask, what do you mean by innovation? If innovation is taking your newspaper, for example, and putting it online for free, I mean, I don't consider that much innovation. Is innovation converging all these media? That's happening anyway. I mean, I don't know that that's a great innovation for the press. You want innovation, go look at some of the websites that are being created by people who, for now, have other jobs and make money at Barnes & Noble or some other place, and they put out local news on these little websites in all kinds of different interesting ways, in ways that even the mainstream media don't do. But the idea that those little websites add to the voice, well, they do in numbers, and you can count them, but there's only one mass media, and that's television and radio. Still, more people go there to get news than they do to any of the websites and the blogs. And if I got my news only from websites and blogs, I would never have to hear a thing that I didn't agree with or that didn't comfort me. The press, the newspapers and the television stations, at least I have an opportunity to be exposed to something that I wouldn't expose myself to. And that's an important point that's often overlooked. The websites may grow. They all may be adding to the voice of the country in the way that that the press does now, but they're not there, and I don't know how long it's going to take them to be there.
The smaller the better a lot of times with this. You get a lot of innovation from small business in America. That's the backbone. When you look at where we went the wrong way down the internet road, it was by a bunch of big newspapers all deciding that they were going to follow the same pathway. That wasn't innovation. Nobody chose different pathways to go. They all decided to just give away the product and hope one day that somebody would tell them how to make $1 off of it. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, we want to just take a break now so we can let the audience get in on this very interesting conversation. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. I'm sure that with the questions that come from the audience, you'll have opportunities to elaborate on points that you feel need elaborating. So a 10-minute break. Thank you.
And you really want the voices of a lot of different people. Start guaranteeing that they can get on television.
Does anyone on the panel have thoughts on public access?
I'd just like to point of clarification. In addition to the primetime 1-hour-long local specials, I just want to remind you that we do 4.5 hours a day of local programming in the form of news.
And I'm only doing 168 hours a week.
I have to agree with everything Louise Thompson says. She does a great job. The program does a great job. The station does. And it has been a political football here. So it would be nice to have some rules from the federal government that would make sure these kinds of stations survive. You have local mayors and county commissioners bargaining away the right for us to have these channels through contracts and taking a little bit of money to make sure they can do their own government channel, which at the end of the day just promotes county commissioners and what they're doing. So, I think she's got a very valid point, and I would support the FCC doing whatever it can to make sure some of these cable dollars actually provide us some public access.
Any other specific ideas on how to improve the vibrancy of community access TV?
I just need to say, in the interest of openness, I agree with all that, but I'm also on the board of Tampa Public Access TV. So,
you said that you're the last public access station
in the state of Florida.
Station in the state.
Gainesville has been trying for one for years, and so has the other universities in the state have been trying to get them. We are on the grounds of the University of Tampa.
And how long have you been doing this?
A nonprofit took over the management of the public access station 10 years ago this month.
So how many public access stations were there in Florida 10 years ago?
I don't really know, but probably in the dozens.
And let me clarify, you are now not in the county, right? You're only in the city?
We are not funded by the county anymore.
Okay.
We are funded only by the city of Tampa. Our budget's been cut in the last 2 or 3 years by 60%. We've done all these laying off and shortening hours and all those kinds of things. Of course, we don't have to worry about programming because people put it on for free. So we're not paying for that. But we do have to operate a TV station and train people in video production skills who later come to work for your channels, the other channels. I also want to point out something about radio I've forgotten for a minute. Because of the consolidation of the radio stations, musicians, local musicians, don't get the play that they used to get when I was growing up anyway. So as a result of that, our station for the last 5 years has welcomed all musicians to come and put their programming over any bulletin board messages that we're doing, put their music, if it's original music, so that at least they're getting play on Tampa Bay Community Network, albeit it might be 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, but at least they're getting some play that they ordinarily would have gotten from radio stations that were actually separately owned little community stations as they were in the days of old.
There was additional point that you made that's important about young people starting at community access, public access stations, getting the skills there, getting interested in it, and then later moving on into other forms of journalism. And the only other thing I would add that I have no disagreement with that, but to keep in mind that that's not the only answer.
No.
Commercial stations, too, ought to be very mindful of the local community.
I agree. I'm just adding our 2 cents.
Yeah.
There's not just the people who get into careers in television and other media that got their training at their local access channels, but there's politicians. Our president used the Chicago Access Network, in fact, when he was coming up with his political philosophies and so forth. And so a lot of people learn to be on television, learn to do politics, learn to find out whether or not they have a following by coming out to those stations. And of course, I think we have great economic impact because people who weren't in television have, gotten to be in television or in related media fields.
And let me note that public access is one of the, if not the only place where people have ready access to mass media. You can go online and you can start a blog and you can have a website, but public access puts you on television. And since that nonprofit took over, and it took over with the express desire of opening up more voices in the community, it has done that. There's no doubt about that. But on the other hand, it's been an absolute continual fight against government censorship, against people who don't want the competing ideas, for funding, against the county taking away the funding the first time because it didn't like the content. I mean, yeah, this is a place where people can voice their opinions, but to run that station has been a kind of a nightmare of fighting every inch of the way for it. So it gets the support of the producers and the people who produce the shows, but it's a fight to keep that going. And that's one of the last outlets of mass media outlets that people have.
Couldn't you argue that that's a cautionary tale about government involvement in media?
No, I don't think so. This is basically it's government financing a media, an outlet pretty much entirely. I think it's a cautionary tale about government not wanting necessarily to see competing ideas and wanting to control information.
Certainly true. Once they've gotten in office and used, in our local market, once they've used the television, the public access channels, to get themselves in office, they don't want anybody else coming in to use them for that same purpose. They also, a lot of them, don't appreciate on public access television, you'll often see criticism of government and criticism of leaders. Where are you going to complain to, complain City Hall, as we used to say? They go to our channels, they get trained, and they get up and talk about their way of thinking about different events, from war, Afghanistan, terrorism, to local things like where to put the Friendship Bridge or not, or whatever. So they get to talk about all these different things. And when they're doing that, they're complaining sometimes about the way their government's working, which is as it should be. And as I tell every orientation class, I think your voice is just as important as anyone on TV. Your opinion of something should be brought forth, and we really believe in community dialogue, as Dr. Dardenne mentioned. We really want the community to come together, express these divergent points of view so that maybe they'll understand each other a lot better than they do now. In any event, I would really appreciate it if the FCC would put on their calendar to please look at guaranteeing again what used to be guaranteed, which is the public's right to the airwaves, the cable waves, as I say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Beth Bell, B-E-L-L, and I'd like to second Ms. Thompson's testimony there. I'm a big fan of public access. I very much appreciate some help hanging on to the very last one in Florida. My comments are the FCC's authority to regulate broadband and ensure net neutrality have been called into question by a recent court ruling. But as I see it, there's still a way the FCC can support a democratic internet with the authority it currently has. Protecting media diversity offline will protect media diversity online. A recent study that I've become aware of showed that 80% of traffic to news and information websites online is concentrated to just the top 7% of those websites. And the vast majority of those highly trafficked websites are operated by regular media, newspaper, television stations. So the same big companies that dominate media offline dominate media online. And if there is some question as to how much regulatory authority there will be in the online area, then I would suggest strongly that we look at regulating what we can right now that feeds the online. So I'd like to say that. And allowing more media consolidation will worsen the situation across the country, not just here in Tampa, and give us access to even less news, whether it's over our cell phones, television, or radio, or the internet, or newspaper. In the Tampa market, we have two major newspapers. One, St. Pete Times, locally owned, independent. The other, the Tampa Tribune, is cross-owned by Media General. And that same company owns our NBC affiliate and our largest news and information website, TVO.com. One newsroom, sharing profits, echoing the same news across three major media platforms in one market. And we here in Tampa have watched the parent company lay off Tribune reporters. This has resulted in less news, fewer pages of news, literally fewer pages, literally a smaller newspaper by an inch in width. Cross-ownership, in my opinion, puts its thumb on the scale of competition and sets up an echo chamber that leaves our communities, especially our minorities, critically underserved. By example, tens of thousands of Haitians live in this community and call Tampa Bay home. And this is the newspaper on the day after, these are the two newspapers, on the day after the earthquake in January. And our local independent newspaper, family-owned newspaper, whatever, did a banner ad and a really, in my opinion, commensurate to the level of the tragedy. It was horrible, it was grotesque. And so their headline reflects that. It's big, there's a huge story. And the Tampa Tribune on that same day chose to stick with another big story, a local story for sure, but it's one that they were probably already intending to go with, and it was about traffic because of sinkholes on our interstates. Big story, no doubt. But the biggest story for that day for at least 30,000 people here in the Tampa Bay area was that their homeland had been completely reduced to rubble. And the Tampa Tribune has this little picture up in the top corner. I would have thought it was an advertisement, seeing the size of the headline on the rest of the paper. And it, see story, page 9. Basically, the Haitian interests were not reflected on this day in that newspaper. It's just a small example. Just one happened. I was passing through the newsroom, and I just happened to see that, and so grabbed it up. It's not the only example. Let's see. again, with the future unclear for regulatory authority, I think that we need to make sure we can do our job, you can do your job, and regulate what we do have right now, and don't end the ban on cross-ownership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Dr. Belinda Noah, N-O-A-H, and I did get my start at the public access station here in Tampa as well. I graduated from USF Mass Communications major, and I went on to law school, but I decided to combine the law and the media, and I was one of the first attorneys, if not the first attorney, to start producing the legal talk shows in this area as well as throughout the country, long before the legal analysts became very popular. But I'm here today because I'm very concerned about the coverage that's provided to all of the candidates in the political races in this area, in the Tampa Bay area. For example, I ran for U.S. Senate in 2006, and I came in third out of a field of 8 candidates. However, the coverage that the candidates received was very, very unfair. There were 2 candidates that received all of the publicity, and if you did not know that there were 8 of us running, to read the papers in this area and to view the news coverage, you would think that there were only 2 candidates. And I'm also a candidate in 2010 for the U.S. Senate, and I see the same pattern occurring again. For example, whenever there's coverage of the U.S. Senate race, the reporters will state that we have 2 candidates in this race. However, it will only take a quick look at the Secretary of State's website to see that there are several other candidates in this race. So there is a real problem with the objectivity and the type of coverage. The journalism has really, if I was grading the coverage in this area, they would definitely receive an F, because it's just inexcusable, the type of coverage that's being provided with respect to the political scene here in this area. So I am definitely opposed to any type of cross ownership beyond what is present today. In fact, I would propose that we, and I believe that one of the panel members did allude to this as well, that we begin to look at a way of providing a public forum for all of the political candidates to have an equal opportunity to present their campaign platform to the voters. And I think that is the only way we will be able to return to a democracy, because at this point I'm afraid that this country will soon resemble more of a dictatorship, because what's happening is that the journalists, the establishment media, is basically pre-selecting the candidates for the people. And they are doing that by making it appear as if there are only, let's say, 2 candidates in a race, when there are several other alternatives available to the people. And most people, even though we have the internet has really come a long way, most people still get most of their news and their political information from the establishment media. So I'm really asking that they basically desist from this type of unfair, basically fraudulent behavior, and return to the type of journalism I know that they can provide in this area. And as I said, I did graduate from USF, and I know that we have outstanding reporters and owners out there, but they just need to be held accountable, and I think that the FCC can do that.
Did you find that the coverage was different in that regard in other parts of Florida than in Tampa?
No, it's basically the same throughout the state of Florida.
I had a related question for the panel, jumping off this. The common projection is that because of the Citizens United case, that there's going to be a significant increase in the amount of political advertising going to local TV stations in the next cycle. If that is the case, do you feel that the local TV stations should respond to that by increasing the amount of coverage, of news coverage they give to political campaigns, or the amount of airtime that they give to political candidates, so that the paid-for advertising doesn't dominate the airwaves?
I don't think the amount of advertising should dictate the amount of content in any category whatsoever that you provide. I think the nature of the individual races and the overall importance to the community and to the viewers is what really should dictate the amount of coverage. I know that obviously there are some very interesting races in 2010 that we have initiated coverage of far earlier than we normal because of the level of interest. So I think it really is the community interest and the viewer's interest that should determine the level of coverage.
There is a fairness issue, though, involved, and it's one I think that does relate strongly to cross-ownership or consolidation issues, particularly in local elections. And the more local, like judgeships and things like that, the newspaper, generally speaking, has an enormous influence. I mean, a lot of people don't go into a voting booth without a newspaper because they endorsements, recommendations, because they don't know much about judgeships in some of those races. And the problem becomes if, in fact, more local media, if there are more than one newspaper, which in most places there aren't, but if more local media are owned by a single owner, that influences the coverage of those races. And it would seem to me that one of the issues brought up by the speaker would be resolved if, in fact, there were more local owners and more perspectives on local politics in communities and not fewer.
And experimentation is also a factor. I mean, I disagree with some of the comments earlier that there's not much experimentation. I think there's a lot of experimentation in media now, regardless of ownership. So actually the case you're bringing up is long-standing. The media quickly says, well, we can't cover everybody. Here are the ones who are leading. We give them more space. We mention the others every now and then. People ought to know. We just don't have the space to try to cover everybody who decides to run. Well, you have internet now. You have a lot of means of covering a story, and a lot of experimentation is going on. So there ought to be a way to help the public better understand the positions of all the people running. And I, too, would separate that from the amount of ads that will be coming in. That is an important issue in itself, but I think that's a separate one.
But there is a litmus test, and it not only happens with major papers, it happens with television stations, it happens with small newspapers, and even with League of Women Voters on how many people you put on stage, and is there some level of some tests that you give to say, okay, well, you know, we're going to include this candidate, we're not going to include this candidate. Recently I had a candidate just get really upset with me. They were a write-in candidate, and they wanted me to interview him. I said, I'm not going to interview a write-in candidate. You did nothing to qualify to be on the ballot. And in fact, your name won't even appear on the ballot. And of course, you know, you lead into an argument. At the end of the day, he got 2 votes. His whole family obviously didn't even write him in. But, you know, at some point in time, I understand the concern. I don't necessarily know if more media is going to deal with that issue, or even smaller media or more diverse media, because there is some argument about, you know, how do you cover 25 presidential candidates who are running when you know that a vast majority of them, no matter what you do as far as coverage, are going to get no more than a handful of votes one way or the other. So I don't know if the answer is up here for your problem.
Again, that's when you would, the public forum would come into play, where you would have a specified setting, a specified time for each qualified candidate under the law to have an opportunity to present his or her platform. So that's how we could resolve that issue. And this reminds me of an incident in 2006 with the governor's race here. We actually had to sue in order to get into the debate. Now, this particular candidate sued, and he was allowed to participate in the debate. However, during the entire debate, they never showed his face. And I just thought that was just an abomination. It was inexcusable for that. The other two candidates, who were the pre-selected candidates based upon the type of coverage they received, their faces were shown at every possible opportunity. The other gentleman, who had to litigate in order to get into the debate, the viewing audience never saw the man's face because I watched the entire debate. And I just thought there was no justifiable reason for that at all under the circumstances. So we just need to step back and think about the public trust that you have with respect to the license that is provided from the people to the media. And I think once that is done, we can begin to address and redress the problems that I've been discussing today, because it is a major problem, and I think it's undermining the profitability of the establishment media as well, because a lot of people are beginning to see that this is what's going on, and that is causing them to lose confidence. It's not just the economic situation we're facing now, which is the cause of the loss in profitability in many cases. It is because of the loss of confidence, because of the behavior that's being exhibited with respect to the fairness in the political arena, and as well as some other arenas. You're not providing equal coverage under the same circumstances. And that can be corrected.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think we'll alternate sides.
I should point out that the attorney who litigated for Max Linn in that debate is Mark Adams, right over there, who's going to speak next. I'm Bill Bucolo. I'm with. I live in St. Petersburg. I'm sorry to see the St. Petersburg Times isn't represented here, and I want to just make a quick comment that
Times is represented.
I don't count you, although I know you're the owner of the Times. You're not the Times, thank God. So I just. I acknowledge that corporate leaders typically get to where they are because they're the brightest and the best among the bunch that they are. And it's in the nature of corporations to excel, and if they win, because they've excelled in their market and they've reached the pinnacle, the top. That doesn't always leave room for competition. And often in this country, we've had to step in and equalize the field when an industry becomes dominated by just one company or one segment of an industry. So I just think it's reasonable to expect that if we're going to depend on information to the public to help govern the country and to help choose leaders wisely, we're going to have to split some of the access to the public and keep a steady beady eye on the tendency of corporations to excel so well that they shunt out all other sources of news in the same milieu. In print, for instance, I mean, we simply only have one newspaper in St. Petersburg. There are small publications. We only have really one publication, a dominant publication in Hillsborough. There are small publications, and they get little segments of the population. But they can't. But if the St. Petersburg Times decides it likes a candidate or it likes an issue, we're going to hear a lot about that issue or that candidate. If there was a competing publication, they would be on their toes more, the dominant publication, and because of the competition. I understand that there are practical considerations in terms of market and advertising support and so forth, but I think that it isn't unreasonable for the FCC to consider the impact of corporate dominance and what that means for getting a broader point of view to a large public. I totally support Poynter Institute's recommendations to the FCC also, but to me the key thing is corporate dominance and whether or not it really has a place in providing information to the public. the way the public needs to have that information.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Adams. I happen to be the person that had the audacity to represent Max Linn, the Reform Party candidate for governor in 2006, in suing the Florida Press Association and Media General to get a third-party candidate into the debates. Thank you. We won the first 2 injunctions in U.S. history, getting a third-party candidate into debates. That's because up until Ross Perot scared the heck out of the leaders in both major parties, the League of Women Voters handled debates and quite often did include third-party candidates like Ross Perot. So I appreciate Dr. Noah mentioning that. I mean, certainly that's the role of the press as envisioned by the founders. Just like the previous gentleman mentioned, the public needs to be informed by the press regarding what's going on in the community to make the best decisions when it comes to choosing leaders and taking action. Now, right now, I also write for the Daily Censored, which is a blog affiliated with Project Censored. And it's an unpaid position, and I'm one of the few bloggers out there that actually goes out and gathers news and reports it. And usually what I do is I first push the local media, see if the local media will report it. Quite often they don't report things. Like, for instance, Gannett down in Fort Myers just did a cover-up story on judges throwing fathers in jail for failing to pay child support, even though there was no criminal complaint filed and there was no motion for contempt filed. So the judges were just looking at the records and issuing arrest warrants without jurisdiction, because first, to get the court to act, you have to invoke jurisdiction. Now, Gannett did 2 stories covering that up. All right, we're talking about federal crimes here, folks. And that's what happens when you have a consolidated media. Like the gentleman from Fort Myers says, the public's voice, what's happening to the public, doesn't get reported. In fact, what you see all too often is a cover-up story, like Gannett's paper, the Fort Myers News Press ran. 2 cover-up stories. Speaking about cover-up stories regarding public access here, Louise Thompson spoke about public access. In 2008, all of the local media claimed that tax revenues and expenditures were dropping, and that was the reason they had to eliminate funding for public access TV in Pinellas County and Hillsborough County. In fact, that was a lie. Tax revenues and expenditures were going up by millions of dollars. That was there for everyone to see, including the reporters for the St. Pete Times and the Tampa Tribune that were sitting just off camera when I waved the county's information sheet at the public comment to the county commission here in Hillsborough County. Now, why would mainstream media give away ads for free to silence a small local publication? Why would mainstream media misrepresent what was going on with tax revenues and expenditures to silence public access TV? I don't know the answer to that, but it certainly is not right. And it comes from the fact that we've got such a consolidated market now that we have this cartel behavior. The cartel decides what's going to be newsworthy and what's not newsworthy. And I've spoken with a former member of the editorial board of the Tampa Tribune, actually 2, who've told me, and the St. Pete Times, who've told me, well, you know, it's government corruption, especially involving the judiciary. We tend to shy away from that type of stuff. We're really not allowed to talk about that type of stuff. And that is a fundamental problem, because that's what freedom of the press is here for the press to inform the public, not keep the public in the dark. And in case you all haven't noticed, the economy's been trashed by the things that have gone over the last few years. Banks have been taking advantage of people severely over the last decade. Millions of American families have lost their homes due to bank fraud, yet the press, the mainstream press, tells us poor people took advantage of the bankers. And the reality is banks took advantage of the poor people left and right, and government regulators looked the other way. In fact, Florida's Attorney General admitted that tens of thousands of complaints about bank fraud made by homeowners facing the loss of their home were thrown in the trash rather than investigated. So the newspapers look the other way on that stuff, and that's part of the, so they're involved really with the banks in our economic collapse right now. And it's hurt them too, because, everybody's had declining revenues because of the economy. And also, newspaper subscriptions have obviously plummeted because, after all, who wants to pay for lies and propaganda when you can get them for free on TV?
Would any of our panelists like to respond?
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gene Etzinger. That's Jeanettsinger. I'm a career journalist. I got involved about 40 years ago in this profession. I've worked for the Chicago Tribune, the Associated Press, the Miami Herald, and I've worked outside the continental United States for about 25 years in media there. The reason I got into this field is I truly believe it's a calling. I believe that the news media have a responsibility in a democracy to provide information and news to people to help them make informed decisions that will affect their lives. These are decisions that range from how they're going to vote in the voting booth to how they're going to spend their money to how they're otherwise going to allocate their time, their treasures, and their talents. I have seen that become less and less and less what the media do through these decades. I'm almost tempted to say right now I support the idea of convergence, of crossover, of vertical integration, whatever you choose to call it, because it's not going to make any difference, I don't think, at this point. You're losing your audience. The audience you have is the elderly, aging, and dying audience. You don't have the up-and-coming audience who are getting their information from other sources. I know that from my own son. I know that from young people I work with. They don't read newspapers. They don't watch television. And it's pretty hard to find local news on a radio station. You're blessed here to have WMNF. I live 50 miles south of here in Sarasota. We're blessed to have WSLR, another community. It's a low FM radio station. Other than that, there's nobody in the radio who's covering local news. I get most of my national and international news from PBS. I pick up my newspaper in the morning and I see the same thing I heard the night before I went to bed as far as national and international news. What I'm looking for is local coverage. The newspaper in Sarasota is owned by the New York Times. It has historically been a cash cow for the New York Times, and I believe even in this economy it continues to be so. As newspapers and TV stations have been forced by the economy to cut back on their staffs, to consolidate their staffs, they've reduced the coverage. You're giving us a smaller, less informative product, and you're asking us to keep wanting to pay for it, or to tune to it, or to buy the products of the advertisers in that medium. It just is not a model that's going to work. What I think would work is returning to the local community, covering the local community, providing access to the local community. I look at my local section in the Sarasota Herald Tribune. It says Sarasota at the top. That's the B section. That's after I've looked through the A section and only found what I already knew the night before. But I get to the local section and I see stories from the county north of me, the county south of me, and maybe one or two stories from Sarasota County or maybe the city of Sarasota. That's because they don't have enough reporters to cover everything and because they've consolidated their editions. A couple of decades ago, that newspaper moved north and moved south into markets where there already was a local daily newspaper. Their marketing showed they could compete, that they could expand their marketing base, and they did so. And so now we're covering 3 different counties in a local community that honestly doesn't care about the other 2 counties. So we're not getting much local news anymore, and that's really sad. I love newspapers. I hate to see them die, but the way they're going right now, I think that's what's going to happen. I also find it kind of interesting in what's been happening here that we've gotten off topic a great deal. We've had discussion not only here on the floor, but up on the dais as well, on corporate ownership, public access TV, cable actions taken to remove local stations, local community stations from the lower tier, community radio, net neutrality, and the equal access and fair comment ideas of television and radio that no longer exist. So people are concerned about a lot of things. I don't know what the answers are, but I don't think we're moving in the right direction to try to provide those answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Arlene Sweeting, S-W-E-E-T-I-N-G. I'm the station manager at WSLR-LP, a low-power community radio station in Sarasota, Florida. And I have a question and then I'll comment. My question would be to those of you that have media outlets, what did you do to publicize this event? What prominence did you give this in your publications or your television stations to let the public know that this workshop was occurring today?
We certainly let the public know, and this is being streamed live on TBO.com as we speak.
That's a really good question, and I don't think we did publicize this event.
Anyone else?
We put in a news item last week on it, small one.
St. Pete Times had a story.
All right. Well, WSLR-LP has been broadcasting for 4.5 years in Sarasota, focusing on local issues. As we are a low-power station, we have limited coverage, and we are happy with that. We are happy to focus on local issues. We produce 115 hours of locally produced programming each week at the station. Much of it is music programming, but we are very proud of the 3 hours of local news that we produce each week and the 11 hours of local public affairs that we produce, covering issues like the local environment, politics, seniors issues, community arts, food and nutrition, and minority issues. We've had in-depth interviews with local movers and shakers, the chief of police after the mishandling of a case of excessive force, the superintendent of schools before a crucial vote on continuing a local tax to support the schools. Other elected officials have come through the station, but we've also covered stories that don't receive much attention in other media outlets. The Voices of the Homeless. This is the third year we participated in the Homelessness Marathon, and this year we increased our coverage to 5 hours of local coverage in the 16-hour national broadcast. We've also covered stories of police abuse, minority perspectives on local issues, and more coverage of individuals and organizations that are actually challenging the establishment get coverage on our station than in other media outlets. We're an all-volunteer operation, except for the station manager and myself. And so it's a challenge gathering news. We have a partnership with a local independent newspaper where their main reporter comes on once a week and shares stories and information about the county commission. We have a VISTA volunteer that covers city commission meetings for us, and we have a volunteer covering the school board and education issues. We work to bring in as much news independently as we can, but we also rely on our local and regional newspapers for information. We've seen a staff decline at the Sarasota Herald Tribune that has affected the amount of journalism you see in the paper. They've actually consolidated their 4 regional offices, as Gene implied, and we're not seeing as much local coverage as we used to see. We have seen philanthropic organizations recognizing the decline in investigative journalism nationally and stepping forward to try to fund nonprofit ventures. Low-power stations, community radio stations, and other nonprofit media outlets do provide critical information to local communities, but it's not enough. We need ownership rules that ensure diversity in the big media outlets as well. If the goal is to promote media diversity, it's hard to see how that would be accomplished with fewer newsrooms. Media consolidation also works against increasing the media ownership by women and people of color. People of color, who comprise 1/3 of the U.S. population, own approximately 3% of the nation's commercial TV stations, and half of those stations are in the top 20 markets. So that would put them directly in the crosshairs of the consolidation issue. Your own Consumer Advisory Committee recommended in 2006 that the FCC adopt media ownership rules that promote local ownership of broadcast outlets, competition as manifested through increased responsiveness to community needs and increased diversity of programming, and ownership opportunities for minorities, women, and people with disabilities. The role of the media in a democratic society is so important in holding government accountable and holding corporations accountable. We have to respect that it has a special place in our society. The Supreme Court has declared that the widest possible dissemination of information from diverse and antagonistic sources is essential to the welfare of the public. Public policy should err in favor of more competition, which translates into greater diversity, to reflect the unique importance and role of the media in promoting the robust exchange of views on which democratic dialogue and debate depends. You asked earlier in the workshop how to go about, if you're going to make some changes, how to go about doing it the right way so that it does result in better news and more local coverage. No one really had an answer to that I could hear, and I don't really have an answer, but I just have some ideas to propose. an increased public interest obligation on behalf of the corporate media, establishing a fund for investigative journalism, allocating increased share of the broadcast spectrum to community groups or minority owners, increased protection for low-power stations in terms of encroachment, funding public access. I support Louise and Speak Up Tampa Bay. We had a group that went to our county commission a couple years ago before the state actually changed the rules with franchise operations, and we approached them about having a public access station. Sarasota actually had 4 available channels for a public access station. They gave us a very negative response. They were very afraid of what the public might have to say, I guess. And they discouraged us. And now the rules have changed and made it much more difficult for the citizens of Florida to have public access. And then require free airtime for political candidates would be another possibility. So in closing, I urge you to support local independent news sources. I think someone stated that more people in the community participating in the media and creating media is how we're going to increase local news, and I support that. I think low-power radio stations are bringing that to the community. Public access brings that to the community, and I encourage the FCC to support both outlets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a related question from Twitter. We don't have a radio panelist, although we did try, but I'll ask any of our panelists if they'd like to respond to this question.
You're cutting off the questions now, is it?
Pardon?
Are you cutting off the questions?
No, absolutely not. We're just taking one from Twitter, which we announced that we would do.
Yeah,
but we'll go right back to the questions from those present, and this may come from someone in the room, but we'd offered to take questions on Twitter. Is it really true that because of radio consolidation in the Tampa area, local musicians can get played only on the local public access channel?
Well, we have them on Daytime, which is our variety show at 10 o'clock every morning, and we do have local musicians there. We also sponsor a Friday night program at various parks around the community where local musicians do get time, and it's on TBO. So we don't get all the bands for sure, but we do make that available on our daytime program, which comes on, as I said, 10 o'clock 5 days a week, and it's on our primary channel, WFLA.
And we frequently have local musicians on our Studio 10 program, which airs at 10 a.m. Monday through Friday as well.
I would say it's because of consolidation of the radio stations, and a lot of the broadcasts come from outside of the area. There are fewer and fewer places for local musicians to air their music. There's plenty of local venues for musicians, but not so many places for them to broadcast their music.
I wanted to follow up just one second on I think Arlene's suggestions. She made a number of policy suggestions: increased public interest obligation, funding investigative reporting, increased spectrum to community groups, protection for low-power FM stations, funding public access, and free airtime for candidates. Are there any of those ideas that you heard and thought that's a great idea, or any of those ideas you heard and thought that's a terrible idea?
I liked all of them.
Well, we fund investigative journalism. That's what we do. I mean, so we do care a lot about investigative journalism. We really take seriously that role, and quite frankly, we get more tips from the community through social media and follow up on those tips solely as a result of having Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, and having that interaction with the local community, whether or not it's through our 12 community newspapers, which all have their own websites. So yes, we think that investing in investigative reporting journalists and the tools that make that happen is critical. If you don't have the audiences, if the audiences go away, you don't have a business. You can't have, if you abandon the role that you play, eventually you're going to just, it's like boiling frogs. You boil a frog, if you drop them in hot water, they jump out, and if you just take the lukewarm water and increase it, that's the same thing. You can't sustain a continual decline of audience and expect to stay viable. So it's in our best interest to make sure that we are locally relevant. So that's how we do it.
Well, I would do everything we could do to provide more ownership in local communities, funding public access and get more voices out. Funding public access would do it. Low power radio would do it. Any of those that results in more voices in local communities, I think are good ideas.
By the way, it's not true about the frog. I used to work for an editor who anytime you would use the frog analogy, he would give you a 10-minute lecture about how scientific evidence has proven.
But you understood what I meant. But you know what I meant.
Yes.
I would just also say that investigative reporting is very much a part of what we do. Mike Deason and his What's It Costing You franchise is one that brings to light very, very critical community issues on an investigative basis every week.
Now, I may be wrong, but I suspect that you were referring to government funding for investigative journalism.
Right.
Do you support that?
Right. I thought that was a very good idea because that would spread the number of people who could do it. And so I'm not sure exactly how you intended it, but I assume that would be for public access, for some other nonprofit causes, or possibly for a special journalist within a news operation. But I think that's a very good one.
Government-funded investigative journalist?
I just really get up to that line and have some problems, but it would take a little work, but I would not eliminate that.
What would they investigate?
I mean, you can give grants to universities.
Well, this sounds like a good one. Wait, hold on. Wait, everyone's talking.
Follow the source.
Everyone's talking at the same time, which is always a good sign. So, John, what was your concern?
I just follow the source of the money. What would you investigate if you had a government-funded investigative journalist, whether or not it's through a university or another thing? What would that portend? It's hard to understand when you have a First Amendment right of a free press. The whole idea of it is that there is not going to be interference or there's not going to be policies and regulations that get in the way of that. You follow the money, and typically speaking, that is what you're going to get.
Well, we can play the same game, though. You don't do investigative reporting of sellers of automobiles who do a lot of advertising and things like that. So there's a lot of investigative reporting that we don't do when it comes to big advertisers. But I just had a group of people come to me from the University of Miami International University who are getting grants to do investigative reporting. They want to find newspapers that will run these.
Right.
And they are looking for suggestions. They want to do the articles in English and in Spanish. And I'm very supportive of that. Now, if their grant process also includes getting a pool of money from the FCC or from some other organization, that certainly doesn't bother me so long as the strings attached to it are for reporting and not for content of that reporting.
We report
we
fear
do a lot
without
of funding of PBS that doesn't seem to tilt PBS in some strange, bizarre way.
Well, and I think John is perpetuating a myth that is troublesome to me, which is that the First Amendment means that government can help support a free press. I think there are ways to have protections. What the First Amendment talks about is the government's control over content of the press, and nobody wants that. But the idea that we can't use government money or public money to help support and sustain a free press is just wrong. And the other thing I would say to the other question about public access, I still don't understand why during the digital switch, why some attention wasn't paid and some of these ancillary channels weren't given back for public access. I just don't understand that.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Chris Broody. I'm a Democratic activist over in Pinellas County. I'd just like to say on the free press in that regard right there, it'd be something like the establishment of religion. If you're asking the government to pick which religion to establish, it's the same thing as asking them which press to fund. So, I mean, how would you measure who would get the funds? Would it be Greg Palast because of his widespread, audience, or what? I think it's impossible for there to be a public funding of investigative journalism for many other reasons, but especially for that. It'd be the government choosing its investigators. The country was essentially deregulated up until in 1929, when finally we had to regulate, industry and the corporations and the very rich, because they were leading us to disaster. And there's been, at the end of the Carter administration, we started leading away from that, and deregulation picked up speed and picked up speed and picked up speed to the point where the Justice Department no longer cares about mergers of any sort in any industry. So what we've ended up with is an oligopoly of about 5 big media companies that basically own, the vast majority of outlets, regardless, together, and they control the flow of information. So you find that there are many stories that don't ever reach the public airwaves because they're not touted by the New York Times, true stories. And then you have other stories that are completely patently false, like the Acorn story that is touted by the New York Times and is picked up by all the other media outlets that are owned by the 5 major corporations. And they're pumped out as truth. So the problem really is, and the Federal Communications Commission really can't do the dirty work that the Department of Justice should be doing, which is busting up this oligopoly into much smaller atomized stations, and the cross-platform thing might be a small minor part of that. I agree with Mr. Luntzer that it doesn't make a big difference. What does make a big difference is the fact that the entire broadband mainstream media is owned by 5 or 6 controllers. And the evidence of how that can warp everything is how close the politics are in this country, considering the fact that a large part of the media keeps repeating falsehoods and inaccuracies that back up political positions that are unfounded, but do help the ownership of those companies. So I think the Federal Communications should keep in mind the idea that the more you let people aggregate the outlets, the worse it becomes for the truth. And so we should restrict cross-platform ownership as much as we can, because we can't get the DOJ to bust up the media. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sir.
Oh, sure. Hello, my name is John Russell, Russell, and I'm from Dade City, Florida. I have to ask a question. What has consolidation gotten us? I think my predecessor just gave us our answer. What we have is a corporatist political system where the only bargaining chip is how much money you can raise. And how do you raise money? You raise money by being a puppet for the corporations, from the president all the way down to your local city council. Now, I can speak to this with some experience, having run for Congress on the last 2004, 2006, and 2008, and not as a write-in candidate. I was in a Democratic primary. I came in a close second. And then I was a general election candidate for U.S. House of Representatives in District 5 in 2006 and 2008. And I experienced full tilt how the media can do exactly what this gentleman said, Mr. Brody, what the good doctor spoke of earlier, and that is promoting falsehoods, misrepresentations, exaggerations as truth, as well as failing to publish what the newspapers and television stations fail to publish is oftentimes more important than what they actually do publish. And this is our media, this media consolidation here, that is not just in the private ownership, it's not just controlled in the private ownership, but it is dollars that control our press today. And it's not the people that have any freedom of the press. We're free to listen to the one-way pipeline that is the mainstream establishment media. And when we talk about it from a political perspective, as candidates running for office, if you're not that puppet that gets all those dollars for doing the bidding or promising to do the bidding, as I turned down from a pharmaceutical lobbyist from Washington in 2006, promising, John, if you're willing to work with, play ball with the pharmaceutical industry, we'll get you all the contributions you need. I turned that down. So this aspect on the political side of things is a big problem. We have a facade of democracy when we talk about the Fourth Estate, which today is non-existent. I can speak of another candidate where the St. Petersburg Times, and believe me, we had a couple of discussions with high-ranking people in the Poynter Institute, Philip Gailey, Mr. Tim Nickens, Bill Stevens, on several of these campaigns due to inaccuracies published that are roundly apparent when I speak quite clearly, as well as having everything in writing, and haven't taken the time when I had editorial board interviews to videotape them, which are available on the internet. And this was just in the last 2008 election, where I was widely promoted in the St. Pete Times as being a proponent of offshore drilling in Florida. Then the correction was, I'm not for any drilling whatsoever. So how does that work for the public? But again, the covering of the candidates is hugely important if we are to again restore our democracy. When we talk about even the public outlets, WEDU, we had a great experience there in 2006 where candidates, if the incumbent chose not to show up, then there was a 30-minute question and answer, which Mr. Rob Lori was the moderator. Well, in 2008, none of the incumbents, chose to debate their general election opponents. And they were given wide-ranging ability to make bogus excuses and everything else, okay? Now, when we talk about recent elections, Kathleen Ford in St. Petersburg, and this documentation is well available on the internet still, and I hope it remains there. Kathleen Ford, the St. Petersburg Times actually, and I would promote that the St. Petersburg Times is a worse paper when it comes to objectivity than the Tampa Tribune. Okay, but the Tampa Tribune being nothing to write home about. The St. Petersburg Times actually did the dirty work of negative campaigning for the guy who won the election, or talking about Kathleen Ford as when she referred in a radio interview to Cornel West, a comment that he had made, and thereby portraying her as some kind of a racist. And this was the St. Petersburg Times did this right up till the end. Then they stopped talking about this and went with a positive campaign pushing Mr. I forget his name, who's currently the mayor of St. Petersburg. So this is the St. Petersburg Times. WFLA,
to bring it to a close, if you may.
Yeah, I'm going to close it, but this is important stuff because of what she said as well. The bottom line is, even this is money controlling the situation, and when we're talking about the politics in this country, and the media that's the word that gets out to the people most widely, because most people, you have to study this day and night to understand exactly what's going on. One word can change the meaning and the comprehension in a person in a paragraph, and that's what our writers are. They're skilled in doing this. Now, Mr. Paulson on this WEDU interview, and this is even when I got up and we had 2 minutes left 2 minutes to give our message after a great fight that we mounted to even get on there, instead of having just experts telling the people how to vote. And Mr. Lori would validate that. So that's exactly what happened. So this is the politics that we have today. The media plays a major role. More media consolidation is not the answer to what ails America. And on one point on net neutrality, if we talk about these ownership groups, these conglomerates that are going to control whose website pops up first, and do that to line their own pockets and those of the establishment, as opposed to allowing messages to flow freely. And this is the last bastion of free speech in America, being able to reach people. Because while we have agreement here, we don't have, this is just, it's just window dressing.
Thank you. Move on.
Okay?
Thank you.
I know you'd like to move on, and the FCC is responsible, supposedly, for changing that which I described, what she described, and what my predecessor did. I thank you very much for your time. It was tough to get here all the way from Leesburg today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, how does one follow that? My name is Francis Scheuer, spelled S-C-H-E-U-E-R. And I'm not here to really raise a lot of dust. I'd rather just promote more space in the subject. And I do have a question. I'd like to know how you all are keeping warm up there. Are there heaters underneath the tables? Anyway, I represent WSLR. Arlene Sweeting spoke quite eloquently towards that subject. As you know, it's an LPFM, which means low power, but on my radio program, I never said low power. I used to just say LPFM because I didn't think it was such a good idea to minimize the idea of power. And so I wanted to say that I was one of the people who initially worked to create that station. And it's the idea of creating a station for the community that's run by the community. There are probably 85 to 87 different people at the moment who create programs on that station. There's a fair number of music programs, and I'm kind of wondering if actually the local songwriters really aren't the investigative reporters of the day. If you listen to some of the music that's written, it talks quite specifically to what's happening around them. Those very sensitive people tend very often to see through and into and underneath of. So the point I would really like to make is I'd like to see more and more space provided, more and more possibility provided, more and more opportunity provided for that niche, which is local radio for local people by the local people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, commissioners and panelists. Thank you for staying so long today. My name is Rob Lurai. I'm the News and Public Affairs Director at WMNF 88.5 FM. Some of you know me. By the way, WMNF is carrying these hearings live, both on our HD3 and also we're carrying them. We're carrying them on the internet too. So these have been carried live and unedited, and we're glad to do that. WMNF is a community radio station licensed to the Nathan B. Stubblefield Foundation, and our board last night voted to support the remarks I'm about to make. I'm also the host of a primetime TV show on Florida's largest PBS station, WEDU, and my remarks are not on behalf of the TV station. Let me make that clear. I've been working in this area for 30 years as a journalist. In the 1980s, some of the biggest news organizations in the metropolitan area were WFLA Television, the Tampa Tribune, and the Tampa Times. From investigative reporters to columnists to day-to-day coverage of courts, local government, and business, they set a very high standard. Some of the sharpest and most knowledgeable reporters could have been found at the Tribune in the 1980s and 90s and part of this decade, too. Now, many of the veteran reporters have been laid off from the Tampa Tribune, victims not only of the recession, but what Tribune employees tell me is the relentless demand by Media General headquarters in Richmond to return a 20 to 25% profit. I talked to a lot of ex-reporters in the last few days, none of whom wanted to come to talk today. When it comes to my television roundtable program, I once had a reliable group of reporters and editorial writers from the Tribune to invite on my program or have panelists on statewide political debates, but that pool has dwindled. There are still many good reporters at the Tribune and WFLA Television, but not in the numbers that existed just a decade ago. Former executives at the Tribune confirmed that there is less investigative and enterprise reporting being conducted at the converged operation of the Tampa Tribune and News Channel 8. There is a divergence of opinion as to why that is among the former employees. Several factors are at play: the economy, leadership at the organizations, and convergence. And sure, stories by TV reporters at WFLA now do show up in the Tampa Tribune, and some Tribune writers now have a prominent role on WFLA television. But that overlap does not mean we're getting any more original reporting. It just means that reporters for Media General-owned outlets are doing double duty. The Tribune and News Channel 8 have done some terrific investigative reporting recently. As John said, two stories stand out, misspending by the Workforce Alliance and the recent reporting on the sweetheart deal given to CSX Railroad. But for a comparison, all you have to do is look over at the locally owned St. Petersburg Times. It too has suffered from the economy, but it continues to do major investigative and enterprise reporting every week, from our disgraced former Speaker of the House to disappearing wetlands to the Church of Scientology to the GOP credit card scandal to the recent reports on the pending extinction of the Florida panther. The Times is unencumbered by a need to satisfy out-of-town owners. Newspaper reporting, what some are now calling the verified media, is the building block to our media structure. In all of broadcasting, we, especially in the electronic media, rely on print stories for ideas and the first hint of a major issue. They are on the front lines guarding our communities. Whatever undermines or diminishes newspaper reporting undermines the whole structure of understanding our community and our democracy. The Tribune has declined in the past few years. It has fewer reporters on the beat. It is a smaller paper. It only has 4 people on the editorial board staff. It still reliably sends profits back to headquarters in Richmond. By contrast, the St. Pete Times, our major locally owned newspaper, has more reporters, a much larger editorial department, is larger in size, and on most days larger in number of pages. The convergence model here in Tampa is not a model on which you'll see more original or investigative reporting. It's a model where the owners of the operations will be able to extract more value, downsize staff, and keep up the appearance of being the community's watchdog. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's certainly difficult to respond to every single discussion point. I would like to say, though, that Media General does not impose a profit number on us. We are a publicly traded company, but I would dare say that Dr. Dunlap will say that they, too, have let go a fair number of journalists in their operation. We certainly have gone through a very difficult time in this economy, primarily because the Tampa Tribune has always been the leader in classified advertising. And classified advertising has been the basis for auto, real estate, and employment. And you know what has happened to those. And as we said, as the economy firms, advertising will return, probably not to the exact same way it has, but nonetheless, we have multiple outlets in which that advertising revenue that we can best serve, connecting both the client, the advertiser, with the consumer. We do investigative journalism in all platforms, not just the Tampa Tribune. We consider ourselves a multimedia journalist operation in which there are going to be some stories that Steve Andrews does that doesn't go into the Tampa Tribune, but is certainly hitting the community both on TBO and on FLA. The same thing with the Tampa Tribune itself. There may be investigative stories that don't show up in the FLA. I just don't want to minimize the fact that any news organization, in order to create local news and information, it's very expensive to gather and to edit and to disseminate that local news and information. In this economic times that we're in right now, yes, we've had to make painful cuts, but Media General has been steadfast in our independence. They don't dictate the news. They don't dictate our editorials. So we operate very independently from what Media General says. They recognize how difficult this has been, and we think that we have been able to preserve more journalists. I don't know how many journalists the St. Pete Times has. I know that in our operation we have 290. It's a significant number. We have 12 city community newspapers that desperately try to be close to the community and report on those local community activities, including all of their websites. Is it a perfect situation right now with this economy? Of course not. But we are able to provide news and information that we've never been able to provide before I know that there are ex-employees who perhaps didn't go through all of the things in terms of the skill sets and the training that we have, and that's a shame. I wish we'd be able to hire them all back, and maybe when this economy improves, we'll be able to do more of that. But I can tell you that the journalists that are there now are better qualified, they have more skill sets than they've ever had, and they have a career path that they didn't have before when they were just in a single media. They now have the capability, whether or not it's Steve Andrews writing a story for the Tribune or Michelle Bearden writing on faith and values, both in the Tribune and also having an on-air story. So it is it's very important to understand that we are having multimedia journalists, and the idea of convergence, when this was converged in 2005, we added staff when that occurred. We did not reduce staff. Yes, in this economy in the last, 2 years now going on, we have indeed cut the staff. But as you heard, certainly from a percentage standpoint, less than most of the organizations around the country. And the sole reason we've been able to do that is because of this converged environment.
Just since the question was asked, if the three of you at the end could say, what are the operating profits for your companies?
We don't separate out the individual. We look at Media General's earnings, and we had a successful fourth quarter. In our first quarter, I think we're going to be releasing earnings. You can see those earnings. Clearly, when you look at the overall profitability, we are profitable here in Florida.
What was the number, I'm sorry, on the fourth quarter?
I don't have the number.
Ms. Dunlap,
I don't have the specific
John, can I ask
number
you a question? And I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I don't mean to be impertinent, but one of the top people from the Tribune who left within the last 2 years told me today that some of the profits made by the local paper are used to prop up underperforming papers around the Media General network. And so profits are generated here and then go to underperforming papers around the country. Is that true?
That is not true. Okay. That is not true. The amount of money that we've invested, like to go digital, to increase the press capacity, to hire people of any ilk, that money that we invest is invested right back here into Tampa.
Dr. Dunlap?
Yeah, this is an interesting market to look at for the competition of two news organizations and to look at their ownership. And I'm not sure to what degree their ownership affects the path of each. John is correct. The St. Petersburg Times has lost staff in the last year, and the paper is smaller. Rob is correct in the journalism of the Times. So I'm very proud that they won 2 Pulitzers last year. They were finalists this year. And just the series that are being done, the regular series, the journalism that is produced, you can look at that and say how much of that is affected by the ownership of each. Paul Tash, the CEO of the company, likes to talk about the importance of being locally owned by a school. I don't know how much you separate all that in determining, as you look at the two. I will say this also, multimedia reporting is going on in a lot of places, and so it's not just the converged newsroom. That's an important element for any news organization, including the St. Petersburg Times. Converged newsroom has some special opportunities with the television station there, but there's a lot of that happening in a lot of places.
Thank you. Welcome.
Buenas tardes, comisionados y miembros del foro.
So, good afternoon to the members of the commission as well as the panelists.
Mi nombre es Oscar Otzoy, miembro de la Coalición de Trabajadores de Immokalee y locutor de Radio Conciencia.
My name is Oscar Otzoy, O-S-C-A-R-O-T-Z-O-Y, and I'm a member of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers as well as a DJ for Consciousness Radio 107.9 FM in Immokalee, Florida.
Y la organización está compuesta por trabajadores de diferentes países como Guatemala, México y Haití.
Our organization and radio station are largely comprised of people from Mexico, Guatemala, and Haiti.
En donde por medio de la estación compartimos diferentes programaciones como en idiomas de criol, que es para haitianos, también en diferentes idiomas de Guatemala como MAM, y también como en el sur de México, que se hablan otros idiomas, también compartimos programaciones en esta estación.
And our programming is in Haitian Creole, as well as various indigenous languages of Guatemala, as well as southern Mexico, including Mam and Zapotec.
Y también como en la organización ha sido parte en descubrir 6 casos de esclavitud moderna o 6 casos de trabajo forzado que han existido en la Florida.
Our organization has now uncovered 6 separate cases of modern-day slavery that have been federally prosecuted that involved agricultural workers within Florida's fields.
También la organización...
You said our organization has been involved in the successful federal prosecution of 6 modern-day slavery operations involving over 1,000 workers here in Florida's fields.
También la organización ha recibido uno de los premios de anti-esclavitud en Londres.
In 2007, we won the Anti-Slavery International Award from the London-based Human Rights Organization.
Y también ellos reconocieron la importancia de la estación de radio que tenemos en la comunidad.
And when we received that honor, the importance of our radio station was recognized in the most recent slavery case that was prosecuted.
Porque de esta manera compartimos la información y de esta manera es que salió el 6º caso donde trabajadores estaban yendo a los campos forzadamente.
Because in that 6th case, workers that were held as part of that slavery operation heard news of their rights and how they could escape from these types of cases by way of Consciousness Radio.
Otra manera como la estación ha ayudado a nuestra comunidad es cuando pasó el huracán Wilma, donde por medio de la radio dimos a conocer la magnitud de este huracán y donde las personas iban a trabajar hacia los campos regresando muy tarde. Y ellos, por medio de Radio Conciencia, escucharon dónde hay lugares para poder pasar la noche o para poder tener un techo más seguro.
And another way that our radio station played an important role in the community was during Hurricane Wilma. Farm workers were forced by their crew leaders to work very late, knowing that the crops would be destroyed by the hurricane. And so when they returned to the community, many did not have information about the impending hurricane that was soon to hit our community. Through our community radio station, we're able to get news out to the workers in the languages that they speak, and then use shuttles to transport them from their trailers to refuge and give them information on how they could be safe during this storm.
Y de esta manera se salvó a más de 200 personas quienes estaban viviendo en unas condiciones difíciles, se salvó a las vidas y cuando el día siguiente las personas querían regresar a su vivienda, encontraron las viviendas totalmente destruidas.
And we were able to shuttle over 200 people that evening from their trailers to the refuge. And that next morning we saw that several of those trailers from which we had evacuated people had been totally destroyed by the hurricane.
También los que escuchan Radio Conciencia, esta estación, escuchan que hay acceso a computadoras dentro de la organización donde ellos pueden como revisar diferentes informaciones en todo el país y fuera del país.
Another thing that we broadcast on our radio is information about the internet that we make available in our community center, which hosts our community radio station, so that people in the community can come and use those computers to gain information to news both nationally as well as internationally.
Por eso como organización y como radios que somos de bajo poder, estamos en contra de lo que es la consolidación que existe y que no estamos de acuerdo porque la importancia de las radios comunitarias es necesaria.
And as a low-power organization, we are opposed to media consolidation. We believe that low-power community radio stations need to be supported and that further media consolidation would make that more difficult.
Porque con estas estaciones se hace posible difundir el mensaje en diferentes voces, tener la opinión de más personas que puedan tener un acceso, puedan informar a la comunidad de cualquier punto de vista o de cualquier información que se pueda compartir.
We believe that by diversifying media and making it more available to more people rather than consolidating it, is able to include more voices and make more people able to participate in the media and also to gather more perspectives on different issues.
Por eso es importante las estaciones de bajo poder, porque de esta manera se abre el camino a más personas para desarrollarse, para tener una voz, para poder difundir alguna información en su idioma y que esto no sea una barrera.
And so we want for there to be less media consolidation because through the way things are, through low-power radio stations, more people are able to have access and to participate. More news is able to be covered and distributed, and people are able to develop themselves through this information.
Estaciones como la nuestra ha salvado vida, ha salvado a personas que están yendo a los campos forzadamente.
Radio stations like ours have helped to save lives. They've also helped to rescue people that are being held in conditions of modern-day slavery.
Y queremos que hayan más radios comunitarias o más radios de bajo poder.
And we want for there to be more radio stations like that, more low-power radio stations.
Porque de esta manera en otras comunidades puedan tener el acceso a escuchar la información de todo lo que está pasando en el mundo.
Because we want for people in all communities to be able to have access to information across the world like this.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a comment. I have a comment on that, if I could. You know, perhaps maybe the FCC should hire members of the Immokalee Farm Workers radio station to tour minority communities around the nation and explain how their station started. If the Immokalee Farm Workers can succeed against language, race, and legal barriers, and in a hostile environment, any minority community can get on the air with a low-power station. And I think that'd be a great idea of you adding diversity.
Thank you. Yes, that was very eloquent testimony to the value of low-power radio. It's wonderful what you've done with it.
My name's Corey Knetjen, and I've been a Tampa resident since 1991. And since that time, I've worked in some capacity for a commercial radio network, a locally owned commercial radio station, Verizon and DirecTV. And when I first moved to Tampa, I frequently enjoyed listening to local radio DJs who are clearly from the Tampa Bay area and had an interest in this community. But since the passing of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, I've seen the local owners and players supplanted in a sudden and dramatic fashion. And if it weren't for the station identification announcement, I could no longer tell you what city I was in by listening to the program content. And I know I've made several road trips through New Orleans, Oklahoma City, and whether I was in Tampa, Atlanta, New Orleans, the stations all sound roughly the same now. And I think that's a result of media consolidation. And one of the reasons I just felt compelled to attend this meeting is my own stepfather was one of the disenfranchised owners, so I've witnessed some of this hardship up close and personal, and I just feel that we as a community permanently lost access to some of the voices that I heard regularly earlier in the 90s, and I just think further eliminating the ban on cross ownership seems like a step in the wrong direction. And I just urge you not to put a rubber stamp on monopoly, and that the 1975 cross ownership ban was instituted to protect diversity of viewpoint and economic competition, and further eliminating this ban would have a deleterious effect on both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Does anyone? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Does anyone on the panel have a last word that they'd like to say? Oh, we do. Yes. I think we have one on the left here first. Yes, go ahead. Yes. On my left, yes. I think you're next. Yes.
My mother and father have 3 newspapers delivered every day. 2 of which go to Tampa Tribune and my mother having escaped Nazi Germany knows something about that. I learned to read by mulling over Calvin Hobbes strips and editorials, sometimes holding both local papers side by side, spread out on the floor. I would compare and contrast the two, and not just for content. I studied headlines, tone, syntax, margins, and fonts. I can project myself pretty well, though.
I think we can hear you, but we'd like to have you also recorded. Yes.
Do you want to go over there?
Check 1, 2.
Am I good now?
Yes, thank you.
Like I said, where did I cut off? Can't tell. Okay, anyways. I studied headlines, tone, syntax, margins, and fonts. My favorites were serifs. So basically, I was quite the precocious 5-year-old. And yeah, the 6 o'clock news formed the backbone of my family banter, and the 10, 11 o'clock news lulled us to sleep. So, and I tell you this because I was upstairs in the snack bar in the break, and a woman asked me something about the local coffee and asked me if I liked the school, and I said, I'm just here for a workshop, and I told her which one, and she asked me if I liked it, and I said I was late, you know. Didn't find out about it until yesterday. And so she said that not many people cared, and I disagreed with her vociferously. People do care, but this information is being kept from us. With that said, when I was in middle school, I was assigned a project in which we were required to interview someone whose career matched our little kid dream of what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I interviewed Judy Hill of the Tampa Tribune. Indeed, the local journalists were my earliest heroes. But now that I've shared with you my passion and concern, to those who might be unconvinced that the youth of the United States are listening, sometime about a decade ago, my heroes morphed. Newspapers are shrinking constantly, both physically and metaphorically. The subject matter is insulting, quite frankly, most of the time. As my prefrontal cortex matured and morphed, so did my heroes. Howard Zinn, may he rest in peace. Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman. These are the real American journalists, but they're not just them. They're all of us. There's a graphic novel that I read. I'm a student of international relations. It's called Addicted to War. You can find it on addictedtowar.org. And here's where I found the following information. It's where I learned about the major media conglomerates' involvement in the military-industrial complex. And NBC is owned by General Electric Company, the largest and most profitable military-industrial complex corporation in the world. And from that book, I have the following quotation for you. Executives at GE know that in order to keep billions of dollars flowing into its coffers, it was necessary to build public support for massive military spending. In 1950, President Truman named Charles Wilson, GE's board chairman, to head the Office of Defense Mobilization. In that capacity, he told members of the Newspaper Publishers Association of the United States the following, and this is a quote from Charles Wilson. If the people were not convinced that the free world is in mortal danger, it would be impossible for Congress to vote down the vast sums now being spent to avert this danger. With the support of public opinion as marshaled by the press, we are off to a good start. It is our job, yours and mine, to keep our people convinced that the only way to keep disaster away from our shores is to build up America's might. Indeed, in the decades following, the corporate media conglomerates helped ensure that America's might was felt around the world in the form of genocides, coups, the School of Americas, from El Salvador to 2 unfounded wars of aggression in the Middle East. I have never been alive in a time when the United States is not participating in active preemptive warfare, and I've never been alive in a time where the media has not been actively marshaling this aggression, this imperialism, and this destruction And you say, you, Mr. Media General, you are the most double-speaking person I've ever encountered in my life. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dave Froscher, F-R-O-T-S-C-H-E-R. I'm just a plain old citizen that's really disturbed by media that I see controlled by foreign ownership and by just a few big money organizations that really restrict the freedom of what we can do by hearing and saying. I am also very concerned about possible restrictions on the internet, where I have to go to get an honest interpretation of some of the things that are going on. I just want to say I am very concerned. I know that there is a lot of extremism going on in this country, and I'm really concerned about that, because when I look back in the history of this country, we had problems with women getting the right to vote. We had problems with slavery. These were right here in this country. Then we look overseas and we see what happened in Russia. The people's voice was suppressed. What would they have there? Then I look at Germany. The people's voice was suppressed, and what did we have there? I'm afraid that if we keep on suppressing the voice of the people in this country, we're in for a big setback. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Skogman. I'm a citizen of the United States and a resident of the Tampa Bay area in Port Richey, Florida. I'd like to welcome the members of the Federal Communications Commission panel that are not from the Tampa Bay area to Tampa Bay today. I appreciate you coming. And thank you for holding this hearing. Hearings such as these are important for public input, and I very much appreciate that this has been conducted and the opportunity to speak. I think this is very, very important. And I appreciate any time a government official who is an employee of mine comes to the Tampa Bay area to afford such an opportunity. Regarding the notification of this hearing, I do consider it inadequate, and there was discussion in the activist community and I think among some members of the public that this was an act of suppression of public opinion in terms of input to the FCC, whether accidental or deliberate. I'm going to leave that to people to decide for themselves, but I do consider that inadequate, and that's unfortunate. Regarding the situation in our country today in terms of government institutions and corporations and even religious institutions, we have major problems, and the media plays a large role in addressing these problems, and the Federal Communication and its oversight role plays an important role in that as well. We see government institutions engaged in illegal spying, flouting FISA Court Act laws, and when we see this in terms of media, we see media complicity in these acts. Large mainstream media is complicit in a lot of other acts by government as well that need to be covered in a critical way and brought to the attention of the public, and they are not. Regarding the current state of the financial industry and media and even government to some extent, we see more consolidation, we see larger corporations, we see more power, more control in the hands of less people, less diversity. This is less democratic, it's less accountable, there are fewer viewpoints, and this is an indication, in my point of view, and a point of view of many people that I speak to, of increasing corporatism. And another definition of corporatism is fascism. What lessons are we going to take from the current financial disaster that we're in right now and still working out of? Will we learn that too big to fail is unacceptable, that no accountability or too little accountability is not acceptable as well, no transparency, and other problems in terms of public input and public control? Are these going to continue? Are we going to repeat these mistakes in the media industry now? Are we going to have the media equivalent of credit default swaps, I say no. In terms of resource sharing among media outlets, I encourage that. I think that's necessary in the current economic and media environment in terms of new media coming into play and giving competition. I think that's wise. In terms of cross-ownership, absolutely not. I'm 100% totally against it, and I can't believe I'm standing before the Federal Communications Commission in a field hearing actually discussing this topic. Why are you even considering this? That is my point of view and the point of view of a lot of people that I speak to as an activist. I appreciate the Commission coming today and all the panelists and their participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Albert Knighton, A-L-B-R-E-R-T, Knighton, K-N-I-G-H-T-E-N. I'm happy to be here. I found out about this, we came all the way from Fort Myers, Florida, and we found out about this meeting through an organization by email, and I'm happy to be here. I would love to start a community radio service back home in Fort Myers. I came from the same area as Ron here, from the Dunbar community, and every time you see something that happens in the newspaper, in the one newspaper that we have, the Fort Myers News Press, in every community is normally good things they say about the community and what's happening in certain cities like Cape Coral, South Fort Myers, Estero, and of course there are some bad things that happen there as well. But when it comes to the Dunbar community, most of the time it's nothing but bad, whether it's a drug bust or shooting. And there are a lot of positive things that happen in our community, and that's why I would like to start my own community radio service. Cross-ownership, from what I understand, may not be the way because you're only going to get probably the same information I just told you. Everything good in one community, bad in my community. And I think with a community radio service, I can bring the good and also educate the people in my community. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think we have time for any last words that any of our panelists would like to have, or if you're tired, we can call it a day.
Well, I think I would like to at least say that I appreciate the feedback and the comments. I would say that we are a local media company. You know, you talked about NBC. Well, we are an NBC affiliate, which means that we're affiliated with NBC and the primetime programming, but we don't do anything with NBC as a corporation. We are a local media company. We have a very direct purpose, and that purpose is to enrich the lives of the people who live here. That is our purpose. Maybe we're not doing it to the extent that you think we should. We build community. We bring people together because we have multiple publications, websites. It is streaming this online right now. And we fuel democracy. That is the reason that we exist. And so it is something that's iterative in terms of trying to do better and trying to do it openly. We have letters to the editors. We have incredible comments that come on TBO.com. But we are also a business. And as a business, we do have an obligation to return fair value of that business to the people, our shareholders, who own the company. The shareholders own the company. There are people like you who might have a 401k or whatever investment you have. And if that investment is not paying off for you, you stop that investment and you go invest somewhere else. So when it comes to what we do as a business, we don't maximize profits. Of course, we're going to optimize them. We're going to optimize them so we can reinvest in much of what we've done. I can't tell you the amount of money we've invested in this Tampa operation to create a local news environment, local news, diverse news and information, both from the input as well as our outputs. You know the competition in this marketplace. I don't know, you've heard all of us talk. I got pages and pages worth of news outlets. And I said that we had 80% of the community, the adults in the DMA, touch one of our products, use one of our products every week. If we were not doing that well, then we would not have that kind of coverage. But I also mentioned as a business that we only have 11% of the revenues in this entire DMA community. We're fighting every day to grow more audiences and different audiences so we can exchange the value with the advertisers who want to seek them. So I just want to reiterate the fact that we think that what we have been attempting to do, except for what's going on with this economy that seems to be such a lightning rod of all the changes that we've made. We hadn't made those changes before this economy went south. We added resources. And right now we continue to add outlets for the news and information, whether or not it's mobile DTV or it's more websites or it's more the things that we do with our distribution of our products. And I can tell you, and perhaps I'm a little taken back by the fact that if you talk to our people, if you talk to the journalists who are in the building right now, and you go, and I'll invite you to talk to them, and ask them what it is that they believe in every single day to make this a better place to live. And it's not double talk. It is what they go, don't listen to me, listen to them. Listen to the people who are on the ground every day. The Gail Sirens, who's out all the time in the community. Okay, we'll talk to Gail Sirens or Stacy Scheibel or Keith Cate, who's a terrific, not only reporter, but an on-air anchor. Well, you know what? This because I'm very passionate about it. I care deeply about this community, and I love what I do because I think it matters.
A couple of closing thoughts. This has been a very interesting 4 hours for me to hear your comments, your passions, your frustrations, and I will tell you one thing. Yes, Gannett is a large media company. We own multiple newspapers, TV stations, and many websites. But the reason why I've been with Gannett for in excess of 35 years is that there are a couple of things that are very important to me. That I have access to resources to compete, that I can create product that is relevant to the local market, and that I'm treated fairly. And I will tell you that for in excess of 35 years, I have never had a corporate involvement in any kind of local newscast or content that we create. It just doesn't happen. We are local managers across our company, and we make local decisions that we feel are in the best interest of our community. And I'll give you one example of a concern of mine with John's affiliate, NBC, which if we don't embrace and look at and encourage change, can happen at multiple levels. NBC just published the fact that after 17 days of most incredible Olympic coverage at a network level, utilizing resources online, on air, everywhere, they lost $223 million in bringing the Olympic coverage to the United States, the world's viewing community. If things don't change at some level, this can happen on a local basis, it can happen on a network basis, quality programming will disappear. And I just share that with you. And again, I thank you all for your contributions and your thoughts. It could be either. I cited the national event of the Olympics and the impact on the network, but that can also be a fact of us. If we don't have the resources to reinvest back in to our product to deliver content for you.
There's no diversity. It's just like we're getting everything from one source that's being channeled through you guys, and that's all we get. We don't get the extra, the what's happening local, the local flavor, so to speak. And it seems that you guys, you're still caught up on the revenues, and I understand that. Like I said, it's capitalism. I understand that. But we are not getting the coverage we need. We're not getting educated. We're not getting information that we need, basic skills that we need, because we aren't able to speak to one another. And the reason for that is because there's so much of a conglomeration going on with these companies. That's why we're against you guys getting even more cross media, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm still not sure that you guys are getting it.
Dr. Dunlop?
I just thank you for coming out. I thank you for caring about media, and I encourage you to stay tuned. Keep watching what's happening about media. It's important. And I thank Stephen, William, and others. I thank you for having the FCC hearing.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists on behalf of the Commission and all of the members of the public who came today. It's very important for us to have input from the community, and all of this will be included in the record of our proceeding. And again, we very much appreciate your coming out and sharing your views with us. And this hearing is closed. Thank you.
Thanks.